The anime begins with a representation of the hatred expressed by two clans, which have been at odds for a long time, and whose battles have left death and destruction in their wake and have dragged on to the point of forgetting the reason for their fight. At a certain point, a meeting takes place in the Sunpu Palace, in which the leaders of both clans, Kouga and Iga and Danjo Kouga, they meet with the retired shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu and his companions to witness a duel between two ninjas belonging to these clans. There we meet Shaojin of the Kouga clan and Yashimaru of the Iga clan, who prepare to battle. Quickly, Yashimaru performs a precise attack using threads to trap his opponent against a rock. Because he cannot escape his tie, he tries to end the fight by using his threads to cut his rival. This leaves viewers surprised, who wonder how they make them so sharp. At that moment, it is revealed to us that these threads are made from girls' black hair coated with a secret animal fat, which forms Yashimaru's special weapon, called Dark Binding. After this, Shaojin stands up ready to counterattack and proceeds to fire a sticky web projectile towards his opponent, knocking him down and leaving him partially immobile. After this, he proceeds to attack him from behind, but Yashimaru manages to escape by using his threads to cut the web and making his opponent retreat. Moments later, they continue to battle furiously on the roof of the palace as the elders watch. That's when we discover that due to their constant battle, both clans were forced to sign a treaty renouncing war, which makes Hanzo, one of the shogun's companions, wonder why he would be interested in seeing something like that. Then it is revealed to us that he previously had a meeting with a priest who advised him to use ninjas to elect the third shogun, with the aim of preventing battles between the supporters of the heirs to the position. Returning to the fight, both ninjas climb to the top of the palace to continue their battle. But in the middle of the action, they are stopped by the shogun, who says that enough is enough. Moments later, he dedicated himself to mentioning to the elders how amazed he was by the skill of the ninjas of both clans. That's when he asks them if they would be willing to risk their lives and the lives of their family members to decide who will be the next ruler. What they accept on the condition that Hanzo revokes the treaty of renunciation of the war that exists between their families, which he accepts. Then the shogun gives both leaders a scroll where they must write down the names of 10 ninjas who will participate in the battle. He then assigns each clan to protect one of the heirs to the position of ruler, and he tells them that once the slaughter is over, the surviving heir will become the third shogun. Furthermore, it promises to grant fame and glory to the winning clan. After this, as night falls, both leaders order their ninjas to retreat and report what happened to their respective clans. They proceed to leave, leaving both elderly people alone. At that moment, we see a memory of when these were young lovers who met behind the backs of their clans. We see them chat about how the hatred between their families will soon end and they will be able to reveal their love. To which the girl, worried, asks if they will both even be alive by then. Gennosuke Kouga reassures her, stating that they only have to persistently persuade their families and then they can be together. They hug, but the emotional scene does not last long, because they are interrupted by a large explosion coming from the Iga village. Eventually, they discover that she is being attacked by Oda's army, which use cannons and firearms to destroy everything in their path. When they arrive, Danjo takes it upon himself to kill some samurai in their path while they investigate what is happening. During these altercations, one of the shots grazed the girl's shoulder without seriously injuring her. They both go in search of the village elder, but when they arrive, they discover that he has been murdered. That's when Hattori Hanzo, founder of the Kouga clan, who had arrived before them, suggests that they should escape, because more troops are heading towards them and they can't battle. At that moment, an enraged Ojin tries to go confront them but is stopped by Danjo, who persuades her to escape with the others. Upon leaving the village, they arrive at a forest accompanied by other members of the Iga clan, where he tells the girl to first leave her in a safe place and then heal her shoulder wound. But suddenly, they are attacked from the shadows and the ninjas who accompanied them fall one by one. That's when we discover that the attackers are members of the Kouga clan, a fact that confuses Danjo. So he asks them the reason for their attack, to which one of them answers that the elders decided it was a good time to finish off their rival clan. Danjo, with his authority as leader, tries to persuade them not to do so, but they reveal that they have direct orders not to obey him. At that moment, Ojin, hurt by the betrayal of her and her clan, ignores any attempts at persuasion coming from her lover. That's when he notices that his efforts will be of no use and he leaves. After that, in a desperate attempt to get revenge, Ojin attacks Danjo with a katana, to which he responds by defending himself. Returning to the present, both elders chat about the 10 ninjas they have chosen for battle, when suddenly, Danjo shoots from his mouth, a needle straight at her, piercing her throat. So he proceeds to cross his name off the list, while his opponent collapses to the ground. He eventually mentions some parting words, just before being attacked by a hawk, which distracts him. Then, Ojin, using one of the needles he had stuck in, proceeds to pierce his elderly opponent's chest. Therefore, he also decides to cross his name off the list, to later fall to the ground and die alongside his former love. Later, on Toki Hill, on the border between Iga and Kouga, we finally meet the protagonist, Gennosuke Kouga, Danjo's grandson. And along with him, we are introduced to Oboro Iga, Ojin's granddaughter, who, like her grandparents, are lovers who meet in secret. When they see each other, the girl hugs him and expresses her concern, since her grandmother has been requested at the Sunpu Palace. Gennosuke Kouga tries to calm her down, mentioning that the hatred between their clans is a thing of the past, and that thanks to the peace treaty that was signed previously there should be no more war between them. He also tells him that his leaders were only summoned to demonstrate their skills before the shogun, which calms the girl. During their walk in the forest, they chat about their leader's visit to the palace. At a certain point, the girl expresses that despite coming from a family of ninjas, she is very weak and does not have any type of ability, reason that makes her feel ashamed, since she feels like she can't help. Therefore, Gennosuke Kouga responds by mentioning that once their families are mutually at peace, that will not be necessary. After this, both reveal that they do not know the reason behind the hatred between their clans and continue on their path. At the same time, in another area, we see how a Kouga clan ninja eliminates a messenger falcon with a scroll belonging to Ojin. But when he is about to touch it, he is stopped by a member of the Iga clan, who exclaims that he should not do it if he is not from his clan. He takes it anyway. Ignoring what they warned him, there we discover that it is the scroll sent by Ojin from Sunpu. The elderly Iga member becomes enraged, while the fat ninja mocks him, mentioning that since Gennosuke and Oboro are going to join together to forget the clan's past, the two of them should also get along well. He then proceeds to escape with the scroll, provoking the old man, which makes him angry, and with his powers of elasticity he knocks him down with a kick to the head. Seconds later, the fat ninja manages to recover from the attack, then shoots upward, inflating his body, to later fall at full speed towards the ground. Upon landing, he loses sight of the old man, which suddenly begins to attack constantly with its elastic hands. But his opponent manages to dodge and counterattack. However, he is not successful with his strategy either. Despite everything, after a few seconds, the Kouga member manages to escape with the scroll. Later, in another area of the forest, we see Xiaojin, stating that thanks to the scroll being stolen, the Iga clan will not find out about the battle, so they will be able to finish them off easily. On the other hand, we see how the members of the Kouga clan find out about the death of their leader, Danjo. Returning to Gennosuke Kouga, we discover that he and Oboro were aiming to train during their meeting, which they did not do because the girl spent the entire time asleep and it got late, so they decide to return home. On the way home, Gennosuke Kouga senses danger and stops to observe his surroundings. There we discovered that 4 members of the Iga clan had personally gone to look for the girl, stating that until Ojin returns from the palace, she is the leader of their clan, which is why they were worried. At that moment, one of them asks if they had seen Raosai, the old man who battled the fat man the night before, because he hadn't returned yet. Just then, Jiaosuke, the fat ninja, suddenly appears, jumping over the entire group turned into a ball, and he stops when he notices the presence of Gennosuke Kouga and Oboro, instantly falling to the ground, exclaiming that the girl please stop seeing him. At that moment, Gennosuke Kouga mentions that Oboro's eyes have a natural gift capable of disrupting all ninja techniques. Suddenly, we see the old man arrive, who excitedly tells everyone that Jiaosuke has the scroll that belongs to Ojin. Consequently, Gennosuke Kouga asks him for an explanation, just before hitting him and handing the scroll to the girl, the current leader of Iga, which she proceeded to read it before being interrupted by one of her clan members, which he exclaimed that he should not read it in front of Gennosuke Kouga since it could reveal vital information to the Kouga clan. Furthermore, the rest of the members remind him that the union ceremony between them has not yet taken place. This saddens the girl, and when she is about to refute, Gennosuke Kouga decides to leave to keep the peace, stating that he understands the reasons for their misgivings and admits that they have acted impatiently. Meanwhile, the members of the Iga clan decide to read the scroll and are shocked by the news. But ready to fight, they decide to hide the real message from Oboro and the others present, commenting that in Sunpu, peace between both clans had been further strengthened, and that both leaders would take a little longer to return. Immediately afterwards, the Iga members, hiding their true intentions, decide to invite Gennosuke Kouga and Jiaosuke to go to their village with them. They accept, and head there, along with Oboro and another girl from the Iga clan, unaware of what is happening, while the rest of the ninjas proceed to notify the higher ranks of their clan about the upcoming battle. There we meet Tenzin, who mentions that officially the peace treaty that had united their clans for so long has been broken, and that both leaders had died in battle. At the same time, we see a mysterious man sent by the Kouga clan moving inside a carriage, which is transported by the force of 2 men. On the other hand, the Iga ninjas deduce that the other scroll must be in the hands of Xiaojin, Yashimaru's adversary, so they decide they must finish him off before he can deliver the message to his clan, since this way they will have a strategic advantage over their enemies. And on top of that, it is practically impossible for him to defeat them, since all 5 of them plan to go against him. Tenzin tells a young ninja named Kishiro to refrain from trying to go find him alone. At that moment, one of the girls asks about Yashimaru, who is told that he will probably return at night or the next day. Of course, if he managed to leave the palace alive. After this, the leader mentions to Jingoro, the gray-skinned ninja, that they must take care of Gennosuke Kouga, but he mentions that he doesn't think it will be an easy task, since they don't really know his strength and they find it mysterious and intimidating. After this, he orders them to keep a low profile, and reminds them that their first objective will be Shaojin, ending the meeting. Immediately afterwards, they go out in search of their objective. On the way, they come across the carriage coming from the Kouga clan, which they do not hesitate to attack, murdering the men who are transporting it. They fall to the ground, releasing their passenger. After this, the 5 ninjas surround the carriage and order the Kouga member to get out, but he refuses. This causes them to cut the box that covers it and send the roof flying with one kick. The Iga members are shocked, noticing that it was a ninja without arms or legs named Jimashi Jubei, who complains about their lack of education for stopping him in that way and destroying his transportation. That's when Tenzin introduces himself and mentions that he couldn't sit idly by while his old leader went to Sunpu, to which the Kouga ninja responds that he also feels the same way about Danjo, since the stars told him that he was not going to be lucky. Upon hearing this, Tenzin, underestimating his enemy, orders the rest to continue their hunt since he can handle it alone. They obey him and leave. Once they are alone, Tenzin states that he does not know the abilities of this strange member of the Kouga, so he demands that he give him an explanation about the type of technique he uses, threatening to decapitate him if he refuses. Then, after an evil laugh, the mutilated Kouga ninja shoots a sword at his opponent with his tongue, piercing his chest and killing him instantly. The Iga ninja falls to the ground and his opponent proceeds to put his sword back inside. After his victory, he wonders what the reason for the Iga clan's behavior is. Then, determined to find out, he sets off, moving across the ground like a snake, which it does thanks to some scales on its chest that propel it forward. On the other hand, as night falls, Gennosuke Kouga and the others continue on their way to the village of Iga. Later, at night, we see Shaojin running at full speed through the forest, while being chased by the 4 ninjas. Once they reach him, they challenge him to a battle of ninja techniques, making him wonder how they found out and accepting the challenge, determined to exterminate them and cross their names off the list. Suddenly, using multiple cobwebs, he manages to catch 3 of them, then proceeds to approach walking on their nets, after having applied a kind of oil on your hands. Once he reaches the old man, completely confident, he asks him how he wants to die, to which, after a moment, he responds that he is going to swallow his words. Immediately afterwards, Shaojin is surrounded by pink butterflies, which fly around the entire area. These are part of Hadarubai's ability, the only one that was not caught by the nets, who, after covering his opponent with butterflies, picks up a sickle that Kishiro dropped earlier. He then passes it to one of his companions, called Nenki, who can use his long hair as if it were a limb, who, without hesitation, uses the weapon to attack his opponent, who is blinded by the butterflies, stabbing him in the head. But this is not enough to defeat him, as after a few seconds he manages to get rid of the scroll, throwing him towards one of his companions, the limbless ninja, who is hiding in a bush. Noticing this, Nenki uses her hair along with the sickle to free them all, and they go after the scroll, which is caught by Jimashi, who flees instantly. The Iga ninjas pursue him, leaving Shaojin and the girl behind, who approaches his dying enemy and to ask him about Yashimaru, to which he responds by spitting a spider web in her face, making her angry and stabbing him repeatedly while yelling at him. Meanwhile, his companions chase the crawling ninja, but no matter how hard they try, they cannot reach or stop him. That's when he suddenly stops, because someone is blocking his way. It is then that we discover that this person is Tenzin, who apparently has not died. Eventually, he asks Jimashi to give him the scroll, stating that he already knows its secret. Immediately afterwards, the snake ninja pounces on him, but he uses his katana to cut his body right in half, ending his life. Later, Iga's ninjas read both scrolls and realize that they are exactly the same, so they decide to get rid of one by throwing it into the fire. It is there that they meet Harurubai again, who states that he was only delivering the finishing blow to his previous adversary. After this, they proceed to cross his name off the list, and Tenzin exclaims that it will be the Iga clan that will survive. Returning to Gennosuke Kouga and the others, they arrive at the Iga mansion at night and are greeted by Jingoro, who announces to them that the banquet is ready. But just then, a hawk landed near them and perched next to the entrance, which made Gennosuke Kouga and his partner suspicious of their host's intentions. Despite this, they respond to the invitation and enter the mansion. Once inside, they prepare to enjoy the banquet in the company of other members of the Iga clan, which don't seem very happy to have visitors like that. After a while, we see Gennosuke expressing his liking for Miss Aikjinu. This makes her very uncomfortable, so Gennosuke Kouga orders her to behave. After this, Gennosuke Kouga tastes the food and comments on how delicious it is, stating that the taste is different from that of his clan's food, for which Oboro tells him that it may be due to the salt they use, since it is brought directly from Aku, which is one of the main salt-producing cities in Japan. After mentioning that, the girl offers to give them some of her salt, because they have a warehouse full of it, to which Gennosuke responds by stating that it would be very useful to them, but his comments seem to bother the other members present. which is why Gennosuke Kouga orders her to shut up, while the girl mentions that it will no longer be necessary to take so many precautions. Gennosuke Kouga then decides that it would be a good idea to take advantage of the opportunity to show everyone the result of his training. So he proceeds to take out something he has stored in his suit, which obviously alerts the Iga members. But they are calmed when they notice that it is a flute, with which they will accompany a dance performed by Oboro. She mentions that they were saving this presentation for the ceremony, but Gennosuke nevertheless persuades her to do it. Next, Gennosuke Kouga asks to be allowed to celebrate peace between both clans with a song and dance to the sound of the flute. After these words, both proceed to make their presentation. Later, after dinner, we see how Gennosuke sleeps, while Aikenu is in charge of locking him up. Then we watch Gennosuke Kouga apologize with Oboro for his partner's behavior, a fact that didn't really bother the girl. Quite the opposite, stating that she found it funny. Gennosuke Kouga also confesses that he had fun listening to his host's stories. During the conversation, he asks about the rest of the ninjas they saw earlier, mentioning that they have not arrived, and that it may be because they do not like their presence in that place. However, he also comments that it will be a matter of time before they get to know each other. The two continue talking, while their Iga hosts meet secretly and discuss the scroll, mentioning that Oboro must not find out the truth or they will be in trouble. They then suggest that they should take charge of eliminating Gennosuke, a task that Aikenu gladly accepts. On the other hand, we see how the fat ninja wakes up from his nap and immediately notices that they have left him locked up. So he decides to escape, molding his body and passing through the steel bars of the window. Once outside, he heads towards where Gennosuke Kouga is and stops outside his room to snoop on his conversation with Oboro, believing he will hear something interesting. That's when we see Aikenu approaching where the fat man was sleeping with the intention of murdering him. Upon arrival, he notices that it has disappeared and rushes out to look for it. Once outside, the girl is suddenly picked up by Gennosuke, who begins to joke about spending the night together. Eventually, the girl manages to get out of his grasp and backs away after kicking him in the face. After this, she challenges the fat man to a combat of ninja skills, stating that if he loses, she will fulfill his wish and be his wife for one night. He accepts without hesitation, and mentions that he won't make it easy for her. Immediately afterwards, the girl begins to expel blood all over her body, which, seconds later, she throws towards her opponent, covering it with it and at the same time flooding the entire site with a red mist. At the same time, we see how Oboro says goodbye to Gennosuke Kouga to go to his room, totally innocent that she is being watched by someone invisible. Returning to the battle, Gennosuke becomes desperate because his opponent has disappeared and he cannot locate her. Then, behind him, the girl appears and cuts him in the head with her katana, knocking him down. So she thinks she has won, but ends up backing away quickly when he hits her back. There he discovers that the fat man used his skills to catch the katana with his cheeks. Next, he fires the katana at his rival, who catches it without problems. After this, the girl attacks again, disappearing into the fog and attacking with her sword. But the fat man manages to dodge her attacks, during which the girl ends up losing her weapon. After this, considering himself victorious, Gennosuke ends the fight. That's when out of nowhere, Oboro appears and interrupts them, asking them what they are doing. And the fat man manages to make an excuse, exclaiming that Aikenu got upset with him for being so annoying and insistent, which Oboro innocently believes him and asks him not to do it again. Returning to Gennosuke Kouga, he is in his room cleaning his flute, while being watched by the invisible ninja. Next, Gennosuke Kouga, stating that he is aware of his presence, begins to speak to him, which surprises the ninja, who remains hidden. He mentions that some members of the Iga clan are possessed by hatred and that he realized this during the banquet. But even so, he is willing to break his ties and begin a new era, asking him if he will be able to trust him and Oboro. On the other hand, we see how she reproaches Aikenu for having used her powers against Gennosuke. While walking, he discovers a trail of salt coming from the pantry, so he gets worried and runs straight to where Gennosuke Kouga is. She bursts into his room, agitated, and notices that he is fine, so she apologizes and leaves. Then, enraged, she begins to call Gennosuke, who turns out to be the ninja who was invisible. When he discovers it, he reveals himself and falls to the ground, turning into a kind of deformed mass and dropping his weapon. He begins to back away while begging Oboro not to look at him, to which she asks him with tears in her eyes if he has tried to kill Gennosuke Kouga. But it seems that he cannot answer, since he only crawls around asking for water. It is there that Aikenu mentions that they must help him, but Oboro refuses, stating that this will be his punishment. Moments later, we see Gennosuke washing his face in a nearby river, when he suddenly notices Gennosuke crawling towards him, which makes you wonder if he tried to eliminate Gennosuke Kouga that way. Immediately afterwards, while the deformed ninja begs for water, the fat man picks him up and tells him that his actions are unforgivable, and she blackmails him by saying that she will give him the water only if he confesses what he did. Gennosuke then reveals the truth about the peace treaty, declaring that both clans are at war. Suddenly, it shoots a jet of water at the fat man, knocking him down. Whoever, to avoid sinking in the river, decides to inflate his body by sucking in air quickly is a serious mistake, since without hesitation, Jingoro shoots out and gets into his mouth, causing him to fall into the water. A few seconds later, despite his efforts to stay afloat, the fat ninja dies of asphyxiation. Next, the deformed ninja comes out of his mouth partially recovered, announcing that the Kouga have one less member. The next day, in the Kouga clan village, we meet Akoi and Zeman, those who talk about the situation of Gennosuke Kouga staying in the Iga clan mansion. They assume that it might be having some problems with its inhabitants, especially the women and children. That's when the girl exclaims that she would have liked to be his companion, since she has never visited that place, expressing that she is very bored due to the presentation of ninja skills in Sunpu, since the powerful ninjas are there, including his tea buddy, Jimashi, the snake ninja, who had promised to go with her and Jayabu to hunt wild boars, to which the boy responds that regardless of boredom, his duty is to take care of Danjo's house until he returns, and he tells him that he must be patient. The girl accepts it, on the condition that he accompany them when they go hunting, but he decides to reject the offer. He then mentions that he prefers more relaxing activities, such as going fishing, to which the girl jokes that it could even be the tallow, to which he responds by saying that he doesn't find it very funny. After a short silence, they both laugh, and the boy mentions that he wants to ask a favor. On the other hand, in the Kouga mansion, we meet Kajero, a member of the clan who expresses her concern to her companions, exclaiming that Gennosuke Kouga has been out of the village for a long time, to which a blind ninja named Hayoma orders him to stop whining, since Gennosuke had decided that way, and he reminds him that despite the objections, this decision will benefit everyone. That's when we are introduced to Jayabu, a bald, beefy ninja with an intimidating appearance, who interrupts his partner by highlighting that it seems as if he is trying to convince himself, which he confirms, mentioning that he is right, since he had no arguments to go against Gennosuke Kouga's decision, showing that he doesn't feel very safe about the situation either. Next, the girl expresses that it seems crazy to her that Gennosuke Kouga has to join a person he doesn't like just for peace, and that he is wasting his life on those meaningless dates, stating that no one wants such peace and that if the Kouga clan is truly important to them, Oboro must die. That's when his partner expresses that he is also worried about Gennosuke Kouga's safety. Additionally, he reminds them that the Snake Ninja's prediction signaled misfortune, indicating that Danjo and Xiaojun are in danger, which is why Jayabu suggests that he could go investigate. That's when Zeman comes in, mentioning that, in fact, he already sent Akoi, which is a good move, because being a woman, they won't distrust her as much and she could gather information. At that moment, we discover that Hayoma has super hearing, since suddenly, he mentions that he hears the footsteps of a group of ninjas in the forest, realizing that they are 5 enemies, which have a desire to kill and do not belong to the Kouga clan. For this reason, his companions decide to prepare. At the same time, in the Iga mansion, Gennosuke Kouga wonders about Jiaosuke, to which Aikjanu, saddened. He lies to them saying that during the night, he insistently went to visit her, which is why she verbally attacked him, telling him that he doesn't tolerate fat people, mentioning that he didn't think this would bother him so much. This makes Gennosuke Kouga laugh, who then mentions that it is good that they say these things in front of Jiaosuke, since it is a good remedy for him. He then proceeds to apologize to Aikjanu for the inconvenience and heads to Ojin's garden in the company of Oboro. But just before leaving, Gennosuke Kouga's girl asks if Tenzin and the other members have returned yet, to which the other girl responds that not yet, a fact that arouses suspicion in Gennosuke. On the other hand, we see the Iga ninjas stop in front of a tree, above which a ninja from the Kouga clan is hiding. They easily knock him down and eliminate him, and then continue on their way to the village. On the other hand, we see how the clan members prepare to fight, protecting civilians in underground rooms, and readying their weapons for battle. Next, they hide and take position to ambush when the Iga ninjas arrived at the location. They noticed that everything was suspiciously quiet, but they plan to enter posing as Gennosuke Kouga's messengers and adapt the strategy depending on the situation later, so they should have no problem entering. What they don't know is that their position and intentions are being monitored by Hayoma. After this, they enter the fog-covered village and consider what they should do. After a few seconds, Kashiro becomes alert, mentioning that he can sense a presence. Out of nowhere, the elastic old man is quickly pulled towards a wall by an invisible force, from which he manages to escape using his powers. That's when we discover that it is Jayabu, who has the ability to go through walls and camouflage himself with them, which, at the moment, announces to all his companions the position of the ninjas who are trying to attack his village. Immediately, they are surrounded by the numerous members of the Iga clan, who draw their weapons towards them. After this, with no other option, Tenzin tries to persuade them that they are just messengers coming from Gennosuke Kouga. He excuses that Jayabu does not believe it, noting that they came from the north, which does not make sense considering that they come from Iga. Furthermore, he claims that their words express hostility, so he orders everyone to arrest them. Kouga's ninjas proceed to attack, but many of them fall to the Iga members, who, with their unique abilities, manage to eliminate a large number of them. The battle lasts for a few moments while the Tenzin and the rest destroy their adversaries. That's when we discover that Kishiro has wind powers, which he uses to generate a tornado and eliminate 2 opponents. In addition to this, he can also absorb projectiles, which we see when he faces off with a Shaojin-like spider ninja, which he eliminates easily. After finishing off most of their enemies, the Iga ninjas proceed to confront Jayabu and the rest of the Kouga. But when they are about to start, they are interrupted by Hayoma, who asks them why they are so aggressive, to which Tenzin responds by stating that it was all in self-defense. He later reveals his intentions to continue this endless war, stating that they are willing to attack again. After this, after laughing evilly, they use Hadarubai's powers to escape. At the same time, in the forest, Akoi runs into an unknown ninja, and as he suspects that he may be a member of Iga, he decides to pursue him. Unfortunately, after a while of chasing, he manages to escape. At that moment, in Iga's mansion, Gennosuke Kouga asks Oboro to send a messenger to his village, since he wants to confirm Jiaosuke's return, since he is worried about him. Oboro accepts and heads to find the messenger. Returning to the Iga ninjas, we can see them running through the forest after their attack, mentioning that now everyone knows their intentions, so they must kill Gennosuke Kouga as soon as possible. At a certain point, they notice the presence of Akoi, who is hovering near them, so they decide to keep an eye on her. After observing her for a while, the group appears before her to introduce themselves and obtain information. There they discover that she is one of the 10 ninjas chosen by Danjo for the war. They try to deceive her, again saying that they are Gennosuke Kouga's messengers, and exclaiming that they were attacked and chased out of the Kouga village. So, not having a message to give Gennosuke Kouga back, they ask the girl to accompany them, which asks about Gennosuke Kouga's well-being, to which Tenzin responds that even if they had tried to kill him, these could not against his abilities. The girl confirms, and then mentions that she is going to listen to what those in her clan have to say. She immediately jumps and flees through the forest, but is chased by Nenki, who uses his hair to move quickly through the trees. After a short chase, the girl is stunned by the impact of a wooden stick thrown at her, which causes it to fall to the ground. After this, the group decides not to kill her yet and use her as a decoy to assassinate Gennosuke Kouga. Next, in another part of the forest, we see Yashimaru, who is running hurriedly, stating that he does not know the whereabouts of everyone, since he has not heard anything from Shaojin, nor from the scrolls, nor from the clan leaders. So he assumes that Kouga must already be aware of the war and cares about the well-being of his people, especially that of his beloved Hadarubai. That same night, in the Kouga village, his ninjas debate what happened, wondering whether or not they should invade the Iga clan. This idea is supported by Jayabu, but Hayoma, who seems to be in charge, mentions that it is not the best decision, since in the best of cases, they could only achieve an exchange. In addition, Gennosuke Kouga is still present there, which obviously worries them, since he could die at their hands. So they decide to go to the Iga village to check the situation, but not before thinking about what could be the reason why they were attacked, which causes the group to deduce that perhaps the peace treaty has been revoked. Theory that Jayabu can confirm, because he heard them talking suspiciously while spying on them from inside a wall, who, just before the attack, when they arrived at the village, mentioned that they had already eliminated Shaojin, from what Kouga's group deduces that he could have been about to give them some type of information, and he was intercepted and killed on his way to the village. Because of this, Jayabu and Zeman decide to go investigate the Takedo Road, the place where their enemies came from. Next, we see Yashimaru on his way to his village, when he suddenly stops because he hears someone's voice. This voice turns out to be Zeman, who hides and imitates Tenzin to obtain information. He asks the boy why he has returned from Sunpu, to which the boy responds by mentioning that he has great news. But at the same time he asks if the reason why he is not shown is because he has been killed by Shaojin. Zeman confirms, so the young man apologizes, mentioning that he was tricked and had his scroll taken from him. That's when, worried, he asks if Hadarubai and the rest of the clan are okay, to which they answer that everyone is safe. He then proceeds to reveal that the peace treaty between the clans has been revoked by Shogun Ieyasu. Upon hearing this, Zeman is shocked, causing him to be discovered, causing Yashimaru to immediately attack him. He uses his threads to destroy the wall and ends up capturing him, then decides to eliminate him to redeem his faults. But when he is about to use his dark binding, Jayabu comes out of the wall and stops him by grabbing his neck. Immediately afterwards, Yashimaru is strangled to death without being able to do anything about it. From a distance we can see how Hadarubai perceives what is happening, and ends up understanding that her loved one has died. After this, Zeman thanks the big guy for his help, who comments that his goal was not to kill him, but he left him no other option. He then mentions that at least they know the truth about the treaty, although they are still intrigued by the matter of the scroll. On the other hand, at the Iga mansion, Oboro finds out about the return of Tenzin and his group, so he quickly goes to tell Gennosuke Kouga, who doesn't seem very happy to know it. Furthermore, Oboro tells him that the scout he sent has returned and confirmed that Jiaosuke is fine, for which he thanks him. Eventually, we see Tenzin and the old man reunited with Jingoro, when Nenki approaches them to tell them that he has locked the Kouga girl in the salt warehouse. After this, the Grey Ninja mentions that Gennosuke Kouga has been walking around the mansion trying to snoop. but he reveals that all those Oboro could choose as scouts have been informed about it. Tenzin asks if Gennosuke Kouga has suspected something, but the old man mentions that no one could doubt someone as innocent as Oboro. After this, Jingoro asks Tenzin if it isn't time to talk to the girl about the current situation. Moments later, the old man and Kishiro discuss the possibility of counting Yashimaru as a casualty, because he has not returned and taking into account Hadarubai's behavior. On the other hand, returning to the Kouga ninjas, we discover that they do not plan to return to their village to spread the news, but they will infiltrate the Iga clan to rescue Gennosuke Kouga. There we see how Zeman uses his abilities to physically transform into Yashimaru, which, in conjunction with his voice imitation, gives him the perfect opportunity to easily infiltrate. After this, they both leave for the village in search of their leader. Later, we can see Kishiro talking to Oboro, indicating that Tenzin wants to talk to her. She accepts and goes to chat with him, leaving Gennosuke Kouga alone for a moment, which, as soon as the girl leaves, he tries to strike up a conversation with Kishiro, who rejects him, turns his back on him, and walks away. We then see the old man from Iga interrogating Akoi, telling him that, depending on her answers, she could leave there alive or dead. At that moment, the old man takes out the scroll with the list of the 10 Kouga ninjas. He then demands that the girl reveal the abilities of each of the ninjas on the list, in exchange for letting her live. It completely refuses to give you this information. Instead, she jokes that if he confesses to her what's on the top of his head, maybe she could tell him something. This makes the old man irritated, but he nevertheless ends up confessing that what he keeps in his head is a great hatred for the Kouga. Next, he remembers when in the past, the Iga clan suffered a surprise attack by Oda's army, a situation that the Kouga clan at that time took advantage of to bring the Iga to the brink of extermination, exclaiming that Danjo is a hypocrite. Hearing this, the girl gets angry and tries to justify what happened, mentioning that her clan would not be able to do something like that, and that must have been some kind of misunderstanding. The old man mentions that this is how things are, but that he would have done the same in his situation. At that moment, the girl tries to reply, but the old man, furious, responds by launching a warning attack. Later, he threatens the girl with mutilating her limbs if she does not cooperate, since he notices that the questions are of no use. As he speaks, he brings his hand closer to her, until he ends up touching her shoulder. That's when the girl, with her skills, takes advantage of the contact to keep his hand attached to her. Noticing this, the old man tries to escape, but the girl manages to trap him between her legs and subsequently bite his neck, quickly absorbing the blood of their enemy from all points where they have contact with them. Process that after a few seconds, leaves the old man's body like an empty and lifeless shell. After freeing herself, the girl vomits some of the blood and mentions that she must find out what the Iga are up to, in addition to discovering if Gennosuke Kouga is safe and returning alive to the Kouga village. On the other hand, we see Jayabu and Zeman arriving at the village. They comment that the Iga are probably expecting a counterattack, because they notice the presence of spies in the surrounding area. They then proceed to separate and infiltrate, mentioning that they will meet once inside and that the priority is the safety of Gennosuke Kouga. Moments later, as Zeman approaches the village, it is revealed to us through a flashback that he and Akoi are brothers. While he is thinking, he is interrupted by Hadarubai, who just seeing him throws a kunai at him, which hits a tree in front of him. He prepares to battle, but when the girl realizes who he is, she is shocked. Returning to Akoi, she is about to read the scroll when she hears someone arriving, so he hides the old man's corpse and proceeds to lie on the ground. That's when Jingoro enters, looking for the old man. He sees the girl on the ground, half naked, and assumes that she has already been interrogated. Immediately afterwards, the girl asks him to kill her and pretends to have been abused by the old man, with the aim of making him try to do the same. Next, we see how Jingoro unbuttons his tunic to do so. Returning to Zeman, he tries to get into the role of Yashimaru, to convince Hadarubai, who after a few minutes, she desperately approaches him and hugs him, mentioning how worried she was, and how happy she is to know that he is okay. Everything was going well, but suddenly the snake that accompanies the girl suspects him and attacks him, managing to bite one of his fingers. Seeing this, the girl throws the snake away, and tries to heal her lover's wound by absorbing his blood. Zeman takes the opportunity to mention that he understands that the snake confused him, but he's surprised she didn't recognize him in the first place. The girl quickly excuses herself by mentioning that her hairstyle looks different from when she left the village, but she assumes that it could have been Danjo or Xiaojin's fault. Zeman takes the opportunity to confirm this and continue with his plan. That's when the girl reveals that the Kouga leader is probably already dead, and also confesses that she herself murdered Xiaojin. Hearing this, he is surprised, and thinks about how Jamushi's predictions were right. He then proceeds to congratulate Hadarubai. On the other hand, Akoi succeeds with his plan, as Jingoro could not resist his wishes, so he approaches and comes into contact with the girl, which immediately manages to hold him tightly and absorb his blood, stating that he has more vitality in this one than the old man, so he will take every last drop from him. While the abuser is dying, he thinks about how to get rid of the situation. That's when he notices a pile of salt near them, which had been spilled when the old man tried to scare the girl earlier. So Jingoro desperately tries to get closer to her. On the other hand, we can see Oboro waiting for Tenzin, who enters the room to talk to him about the situation of his clan, thus revealing that by orders of the shogun, the peace treaty between the Iga clan and Kouga has been revoked, news that leaves the girl totally shocked. At the same time, we can see Gennosuke Kouga, who is waiting alone in his room, thinking that both clans cannot be together despite all their efforts to achieve it. Returning to Oboro, she cannot believe what she hears, but Tenzin assures her that everything is true, and that she can even read the scroll to confirm it for herself, mentioning that she too must prepare for what is coming. The girl still doesn't believe it, and exclaims that even though the treaty has been revoked, she does not agree with a fight between clans. Furthermore, he states that Gennosuke Kouga would not agree with it either. Immediately afterward, he gets up and leaves. But when he is about to leave, Tenzin mentions that unfortunately they do not need the opinion of the Kouga to take action, stating that it is already something final, which leaves Oboro completely terrified. Just then we return to Akoi, who continues to absorb the blood of his enemy, which is slowly dying while trying to reach the salt. Moments later, the girl sees him turn into an amorphous mass and flee through the salt containers. Immediately, the girl gets up and proceeds to leave. But when she is about to leave, she meets Nenki at the door, who is also looking for the old man. Without thinking, the girl swings her sword at him, which only manages to cut a wooden stick that he was carrying. The girl then backs away and tries to attack again. Just then, we see Zeman asking Harubai about the prisoner they captured, to which she responds, mentioning that her name was on the parchment. That's when he discovers that it is his sister, so he immediately asks the girl to take him to where she is. Meanwhile, Nenki manages to immobilize the Akoi, who immediately begins absorbing his blood as well. But his ability does not turn out to be as effective, because he cannot have enough contact with his skin, due to the fact that his enemy is covered in hair, which is why, seconds later, he manages to use his long hair as needles to pierce his entire body, leaving the girl in a critical state, while he tells her that even though he was ordered not to kill her, this has left him no choice. At that moment, we see Zeman and Harubai approaching the place where they have Akoi, and after opening the door, he is shocked to see his lifeless sister next to Nenki. However, he remains calm and continues with his performance. Next, he approaches his sister's body and crouches next to it. He tells Harubai that there is still a little of the snake's venom in his wound. Upon hearing this, Nenki begins to joke, mentioning that Yashimaru might have deserved it for finding himself another girlfriend, which makes the girl get angry and start arguing with him. At that moment, Zeman touches his sister's hand and tries to communicate with her. That's when we discover that they have a kind of special connection, since the girl is able to respond to him, even in her state, notifying him that he managed to kill the old man, and that he left the parchment hidden among the bags of salt. After this, the girl's will slowly fades away, until Zeman is no longer able to hear her. Moments later, Nenki questions him about what happened in Sunpu, but the infiltrator answers slyly, saying that he cannot comment on anything without first talking to Oboro, to which they respond, mentioning that she is in a meeting with Tenzin, who is trying to persuade her, since they claim that she is completely blinded by Gennosuke Kouga. Zeman takes the opportunity to ask if they haven't killed him yet, but Nenki reveals that, in fact, Tenzin is too afraid of Gennosuke. After this, the girl asks him if he wants her to give him the antidote, but he refuses. As if that were not enough, after that he finds out that 3 other members of his clan have been murdered: Jiaosuke, Jimashi, and Xiaojin. At the same time as he listens to his enemy, Zeman slides his hand between the bags of salt and takes the scroll. After this, Jingoro crawls out of his hiding place begging for water, so Nenki throws him out of the warehouse so that he gets wet in the rain. A moment later, the Iga members discover the old man's body, and to make matters worse, Oboro, angry at finding out that they were holding a prisoner, heads there with Tenzin and the rest. Just as they arrive, Zeman bumps into them and looks the girl straight in the eyes, which makes him suddenly retreat and causes his costume to disintegrate, surprising the Iga ninjas. This causes Nenki to lunge at him, totally furious, but he manages to avoid his attack, throwing salt in his eyes. Zeman immediately takes his knife and throws it towards Oboro, hitting it, sending her flying, and wounding Tenzin in the shoulder. Gennosuke Kouga's girlfriend is caught by Kishiro, who cushions her fall. Zeman then throws the scroll out just as Jingoro is about to get it. Jayabu shows up, catching him and hitting the gray ninja hard, who shoots out and lands on Aikjanu. He immediately proceeds to flee with the scroll, and the Iga ninjas do not hesitate to pursue him. Meanwhile, Zeman takes the opportunity to hide. After a short chase, the big Kouga manages to escape thanks to his skills. Understanding the situation, Tenzin immediately orders them to gather the troops, then proceed to head towards where Gennosuke Kouga is, who, just at that moment, receives the scroll from Jayabu and finally finds out everything that is happening. Seconds later, with the Iga troops in front of him, he tells his companions that they will return to their village. At the same time, we see that Oboro discovers the lifeless body of the prisoner, realizing that she has been deceived all this time. Therefore, he asks Aikjanu if they had also killed Jiaosuke, to which she responds affirmatively. Hearing this deeply saddens Oboro, who suddenly runs off in search of Gennosuke Kouga, who stands with his companions completely expectant while they observe the Iga troops. Seconds later, Jayabu demands that they get out of his way and proceeds to provoke them, exclaiming that they are afraid they can't even move. After hearing this, Nenki, irritated, gives the order to attack, but this is quickly interrupted by Tenzin, who suggests that they not rush because they still do not know what Gennosuke is capable of doing. Noticing this, the Kouga ninjas continue with their provocation, which makes the Hatarubai react, who asks them about Yashimaru. They laugh and reproach her that she seemed quite satisfied with having killed her fellow Shaojin. This whole discussion results in Nenki, full of rage, ordering the attack again, but this time he is not interrupted. Various Iga ninjas pounce on Gennosuke Kouga and the others, but at that moment Oboro arrives, just in time to witness how Gennosuke Kouga uses his powers to defend himself, with which he easily annihilates the group of ninjas without even touching them, plunging them into a kind of illusion and manipulating their minds to murder each other. The trio then proceeds to leave, walking head-on against their enemies, who, completely frightened, let them pass. On the way, they run into Oboro, but Gennosuke Kouga continues walking without even seeing her for a second, which leaves the girl totally heartbroken. Meanwhile, Tenzin thinks that they can't let him leave like that, but none of them are a match for his eye technique. At that moment, he sends Kishiro to confront him and also asks Oboro to clarify his ideas. The boy draws Gennosuke Kouga's attention and draws his weapons, preparing to battle. Gennosuke does not understand how he intends to hit him with those sickles, but proceeds to wait for his attack. Meanwhile, Tenzin thinks that the only person from the Iga clan who could defeat his eye technique is Kishiro. That's when the boy attacks, throwing his weapons at him, which are easily repelled by Jayabu and his strength. Following this, Tenzin becomes confident, mentioning that they may be able to have their daggers and weapons, but no one is able to counter Kishiro's wind powers, stating that it is the ideal ability to kill Gennosuke Kouga. Meanwhile, the boy prepares to attack, but while channeling his attack he is interrupted by Oboro, who runs desperately and stands between him and Gennosuke Kouga, begging him to stop. Seconds later she looks at Kishiro, who quickly covers his eyes so as not to see her. So Tenzin, after asking him anxiously if he is trying to kill the boy, asks him to observe Gennosuke Kouga instead, which reveals to us that Oboro's eye technique is probably quite powerful as well. Eventually the girl turns and looks at Gennosuke Kouga, who cleverly has her eyes closed. After a few seconds, he opens them but the girl instantly lowers her gaze. That's when Kishiro suddenly channels his attack again. So Tenzin takes the opportunity to order Oboro to also observe Gennosuke Kouga, with the intention of combining both techniques, which are called the Void of Wind and the Eyes of Ruin, forming a completely lethal combination. But as the boy prepares his attack, Oboro interrupts him again, asking him to stop. That's when suddenly, after opening his eyes for a second, Kishiro falls victim to Gennosuke Kouga's eye technique, which he manipulates to generate the vacuum of wind in front of himself, destroying half of his own face and leaving him completely blind. After this, the trio of ninjas retreat, leaving behind their enemies, who watch them leave, unable to lift a finger. However, despite what happened, Oboro makes one last effort to prevent her lover from abandoning her, but this does not work. Consequently, she is left crying inconsolably. Then, after a while, we see the Iga members in a meeting, where we learn that Kishiro survived the incident, but will not be able to regain his sight. Upon learning this, Tenzin orders Aikjanu to take care of him, while reproaching Oboro for the unforgivability of his actions, to which the girl tries to apologize, but he, enraged, exclaims that he must first apologize to the Iga members who have been murdered in the last 400 years, not counting their former leader, Ojin, claiming that what he did was betray his clan. They later mention their fallen members, and much more importantly, the scroll that was stolen from them, which they claim they must recover at all costs, and take advantage of this opportunity to take revenge. For this reason, Tenzin mentions that Oboro must participate in the battle, and asks him to promise that he will take care of Gennosuke. This causes the girl to burst into tears again, stating that she cannot fight him, which makes Tenzin get excited, and mention that the lives of her companions depend on how she uses her eyes, to which the girl asks what is the reason for so much hatred against the Kouga. Her colleagues mention that their former leader strongly asked them not to bring up the subject in front of her granddaughter. However, given the situation, they decide to tell him. There we learn that, in the past, the Kouga clan was in the service of warlords, and committed atrocities in their name. These were government entities that only responded to a supreme authority, such as the shogun. One of these groups was the Oda army, which was the first to use firearms in Japan, which, at that time, they used to easily destroy the other rulers. Having so much power, the Kouga came to them and took the opportunity to hunt and capture the Iga clan. And since then, the hatred between both families has been increasing. They mention that even if Hanzo had not revoked the peace treaty, the hatred would continue to persist. Upon hearing this, Oboro retorts, exclaiming that they cannot blame Gennosuke Kouga and his allies for this. But Tenzin answers him, telling him not to try to erase the pain of his ancestors and that leaving things like this would not be an honorable legacy. After this, he reveals that Xiaojin was killed while trying to plot against the Iga clan on behalf of Danjo Kouga. Furthermore, he adds that it was the latter, being Gennosuke's grandfather, who murdered their leader, Ojin. She then confesses to Oboro that if only she would take part in the conflict, they would be sure that the deaths of their comrades would not have been in vain. To conclude, he adds that this is what his elderly leader would have wanted. The girl then gets up, asks for a little more time and leaves. After this, Oboro opens a drawer and takes out what appears to be a jar with mysterious contents. The girl looks at it and thinks of her grandmother. On the other hand, we see the members of Kouga anxiously awaiting the return of Gennosuke Kouga and the others. They see them arrive at the village and instantly wonder what happened to the missing members. Returning to the Igas, we see Oboro enter the room again, holding the jar he took out of the drawer. Upon seeing her, Tenzin asks if she was able to clarify his doubts, but the girl does not answer. He then proceeds to sit up slowly. Suddenly, the other members notice the jar and become alarmed. Tenzin quickly approaches, asking her what she has done and raising his head to the girl. On the other hand, in the Sunpu Palace, a meeting is taking place in which the Shogun Ieyasu along with his subordinates. It is there where we meet Hattori Kaiohakairo, the person who informs them of the current situation of the battle between the two clans. There they learn that the Kouga ninjas have suffered 4 casualties, which leaves the Iga clan in a situation of superiority. They are surprised at how quickly events developed. Kaiohakairo then proceeds to tell them about how each of the fallen members were eliminated, starting with Danjo and Ojin, the clan leaders, who murdered each other as soon as they left Sunpu's palace, and whose remains were found in a nearby river, to which the group responds by asking if they shouldn't do something with them. But Kaiohakairo mentions that because of nature the two of them, referring to the love they felt for each other in their youth, they preferred to leave them in a place where they can rest in peace. Hearing this, Munenori, one of the Shogun's companions, he mentions that Iga members will probably continue to take advantage of their advantage over their adversaries. And taking into account how quickly everything has developed, just 2 days have passed since the peace treaty was broken. Most likely, this whole confrontation will end faster than they expect. Suddenly Hanzo replies, saying that they still don't know what could happen, and noting that these ninjas are not normal people. To which Munenori agrees, while remembering the fight he witnessed between Yashimaru and Xiaojin in the palace, confessing that just thinking about that fight makes his skin crawl, and that in front of them, even the best of soldiers is nothing more than just a worm. Later he asks Kaiohakairo to give him the details of the first battle, to which he responds by saying that the fight was fought between a fat man, who no one would ever think was a ninja, who faced a strange old man. He mentions that curiously none of them knew that the peace treaty had been revoked, and they were also unaware that their leaders had already died, so Kaiohakairo mentions that they were just playing and proceeds to tell them about the battle. Munenori shows his surprise by wondering how an old man can lengthen his arms and legs as he pleases. Therefore, it demands to know how said confrontation ended, to which the informant responds that it culminated somewhere in the mountains on the border between the Iga and the Kouga, the moment the Iga ninjas encountered Danjo's grandson, Gennosuke, ending their game of the old man and the fat ninja. After hearing this, those present ask about the next fight, to which Hanzo expresses that obviously for both sides this is an opportunity to end their old dispute on the battlefield. That's when Kaiohakairo recounts the battle between the 5 Iga ninjas who hunted down Xiaojin to take the scroll from him, who was finally defeated and killed by Hadarubai, although he nevertheless managed to save the scroll by giving it to Jimashi, who would flee and later lose his life at the hands of Tenzin, giving the advantage and the scroll to his enemies, who eventually decided to destroy it and keep only one. The informant explains to them that the Iga clan intended to take advantage of the fact that their enemies were not aware of the declaration of war. So both of the Shogun's companions debate the issue, mentioning that what the Iga clan was trying to do makes sense, since the Kouga would lose the initiative to battle if they were not aware of the truth about the treaty. To which Hanzo mentions that it is important to keep in mind that the opponents are not samurai, since they use dirty tricks. At that time, various battles that came later are recounted, like Gennosuke against Aikinu, in which the girl took great advantage of her skills to defeat her rival. They also mention when the fat man tried to take advantage of Jingoro's vulnerable state to blackmail him and get information from him, which we know resulted in Gennosuke's tragic death. Next, it is also told when the 5 Iga ninjas invaded the Kouga village, and they were ambushed by Jayabu and his powers of invisibility in the company of the rest of his clan, which resulted in the massacre of many members of the Kouga clan. After this, the informant mentions that he witnessed all these events with his own eyes, stating that what happened next was seen by his men, and noting that the following fights were especially intense. After hearing this, Munenori comments that an intense conflict is currently brewing between 2 children in Edo, mentioning that there is deep hostility among the heirs of the second shogun. He notes that the guardians of both heirs have developed strong ambition, and he confesses that so far there has already been one violent incident, which happened last winter, in which Takichio, one of the young heirs, was poisoned while taking a bath. He was eventually saved by his guardian, who found him and managed to suck the poison from his body. He adds that the situation has gotten out of hand in Edo. He is then interrupted by the former shogun, who states that everything is going according to plan, and later he confesses that they managed to take care of an infiltrator who was in Edo, mentioning that even though men are prohibited from approaching the inner circle of the current shogun, they managed to get a monk to act as a spy to get to the bottom of the matter, declaring that these women are plotting to take over the country, and that they will be a big problem as long as this confrontation does not come to an end. Right there we see a messenger bird arrive at the palace, which delivers a document with news about the situation of the clans. Next, we see Kyoha Kairo reading it and revealing that his men have been monitoring the Iga clan's every move. However, he adds that he does not have all the details and cannot speculate much about it. After mentioning this, he proceeds to recount the most recent battles that took place, beginning with the pursuit, capture, and subsequent imprisonment of Akoi, which resulted in her ending the life of the elder Rausai, but later perishing at the hands of Nenki, who was immune to his abilities. Those present ask the informant to continue, and that is when he recounts the last battle, in which we saw for the first time the abilities of Gennosuke Kouga, who after learning the truth about the war, it ended up taking the lives of several Iga ninjas and leaving young Kishiro incapacitated. Hearing this seems to disturb Menunori and Hanzo, but the former shogun seems quite happy to hear it. They then proceed to read the count of the survivors of each clan, mentioning that 7 members remain from the Iga clan, and only 5 remain from the Kouga clan. Furthermore, the informant notes that the Kouga are finally aware of the breach of the peace treaty. After mentioning all this news, the informant proceeds to leave with the intention of transmitting the information to his men, adding that he will be in charge of investigating further. Once he leaves, the former shogun tells those close to him that the 20 chosen ninjas have proven themselves worthy of being part of his plan. Next, in the Iga clan village, we see Gennosuke Kouga and his companions gathered together talking about what happened. Kajero then mentions that it seems Gennosuke was tricked by Oboro after all, who, as Ojin's granddaughter, now becomes the leader of her clan. This fact makes the girl wonder if Oboro would be able to ignore everything his men carried out, mentioning that from the beginning they planned to assassinate Gennosuke Kouga in their clan's village. Hearing this, Hayoma agrees with him, but adds that he is not completely sure, because, as far as he understands, this was all planned by one of his men. So he mentions that he can't help but think that it was Tenzin who set that trap for them. Upon hearing this, the girl instantly replies, mentioning that the marriage between Gennosuke Kouga and Oboro was a shame. He later exclaims that there is no valid excuse and that they have been deceived, stating that Oboro took advantage of Gennosuke Kouga's hopes of reconciliation to win his affection. After hearing this, Hayoma suggests that the girl lower her tone of voice, since, although she does not respect the Iga clan, she should offer respect to hers. At that moment, the big guy intervenes, mentioning that he doesn't give a damn about the new leader of the Iga, exclaiming that the day has finally arrived and that they must return as soon as possible. Since having witnessed Gennosuke Kouga's ocular technique, his enemies must have lost hope, so they should take the opportunity to attack again. After this, Gennosuke asks Zeman to bring him a brush and an inkwell, in addition to expressing his condolences for Akoi's death. Upon hearing this, the boy mentions that ninjas like them must be strong, and proceeds to retreat. Gennosuke Kouga then exclaims to his comrades that none of the clans have changed at all, adding that they cannot allow an old hatred to cloud their vision. He comments that even if only one of them were against it, they should be able to analyze what is happening, and if the old hatred returns, they must warn everyone so they can prepare again. There we discovered that Zeman remained outside the room listening to the conversation. On the other hand, returning to the Iga, Oboro reveals that during his failure in training as a ninja, her grandmother mentioned to her that despite being an ordinary person with no abilities, the girl was born with special eyes. The old woman expresses that these eyes could be the cause of the misfortune and destruction of the Iga clan, since these have the ability to disintegrate the abilities of their targets. So Ojin told her that if that day finally comes, she must use a secret ointment called the Dark Seven, which must be placed over the eyelids, which will cause them to remain sealed for 7 days, unable to use her ocular technique. Upon hearing this, the Iga members are shocked and ask him if he is aware of what this represents. The girl responds by stating that she values everything she has been told and fully understands what is at stake. But he adds that she is not capable of fighting Gennosuke and that during the heat of a battle, she might be tempted to attack her own comrades and disintegrate their techniques in combat, which terrifies her. This statement leaves his colleagues frozen, who, after a few seconds, find out that someone has left a package at the entrance of the village. When he opens it, he discovers that it is the same scroll that the Kouga stole from them. Seeing this, the ninjas wonder if Gennosuke Kouga has lost his way, since they do not understand why he would return the scroll to them. Just then they notice that Kishiro's name hasn't been crossed out, so they assume that they are aware that their injuries were not lethal, stating that it is a pretty good observation to be made by someone who has lost his way, which makes them wonder what the reason is why he returned such an important scroll. At that moment, Tenzin reads a letter that was attached, which makes him tremble with terror. After this, he proceeds to announce that Gennosuke Kouga has challenged them. In quoting his words, he says that, despite the fact that the peace treaty established by the Hattori family has been annulled, personally, he has no desire to fight, but as he does not know the reasons for the confrontation, he decided to travel to Sunpu immediately to find out the shogun and Hanzo's opinion on the matter, explaining that this was the reason why he went to the trouble of returning the scroll. He then mentions that the people who will accompany him on his trip are Jayabu, Zeman, Kajero, and Hyoma. After this, he notes that if the Iga clan takes advantage of the situation to invade the Kouga village while they are gone, Gennosuke Kouga swears that the Iga clan will be completely annihilated, adding that he will have no desire to fight, nor intention to pursue them, until the remaining 7 members of Iga. They also appear at Sunpu Castle, where they will fight to the death against the 5 remaining members of Kouga, ending this war. He ends by saying that if they are not afraid of him, they should head towards Takedo as soon as possible. At that moment, Tenzin states that they must attend, and he quickly orders Hadarubai and Nenki to find the Kouga clan and return the message to them. Under orders not to take unnecessary risks, they accept and leave. Next, Aikjinu goes to prepare Oboro's things for the trip, but as he advances, he comes across the flute that Gennosuke Kouga left abandoned before leaving. The next day, during the Kouga journey, we see Hyoma use his abilities to detect the presence of his enemies, to which Jayabu mentions that he is being somewhat paranoid because they are still in their own territory, and a long road awaits them to the palace of Sunpu. The young blind man states that you want to know when they will meet them, to which the big guy responds by mentioning that it is not enough to know, but that the first move is what defines the battle. After this, he asks his blind companion if he knows why Gennosuke decided to return the scroll, adding that he had mentioned that they would go to Sunpu with the intention of finding out the truth about the reason for this fight, which has Jayabu somewhat skeptical, who mentions that 400 years of rivalry and the desire for revenge for the death of his parents should be enough reasons to fight. After hearing this, Hyoma responds that Gennosuke Kouga only handed over the scroll because he knew that the Iga would come after them, since they are totally confident that they will not be able to resist accepting the challenge. He also adds that if they were to eliminate them all, they could also recover the parchment, and he assures that in that case, his big companion would have no objection to it. Next, Jayabu questions whether Gennosuke Kouga will be able to end Oboro's life. He then uses his abilities to disappear, leaving Hyoma alone, and mentioning that he will catch up with him later. Right after, the blind young man and the others regroup next to a small river. At the same time, we can see Nenki and Hadarubai heading towards them to deliver the message. Later, during the night, in a tea shop in a place called Seki Station, Hyoma tells Zeman about Jayabu's recklessness, who left alone and caused Gennosuke Kouga to scold the blind man for letting him go, which surprises him because the big guy is usually more sensible. In addition, he also adds that when surrounding the enemy, one must take into account that it is necessary to lay all the bases carefully. However, he believes that Jayabu would not do anything irresponsible, despite feeling great resentment for his enemies due to the murder of his family members. After hearing this, Zeman comments that there is another thing that worries him, and that is Kajero, who is completely in love with Gennosuke Kouga. He reveals that when she found out about the marriage proposal with Oboro, she couldn't be able to contain herself anymore, and even Gennosuke has begun to realize this. Hyoma then adds that according to what she has heard, like her mother when she gets excited, their sighs turn into deadly gasps, which poison their lovers. Zeman responds, exclaiming that fate has not been kind to that girl, but he adds that under the weight of destiny all women are terrifying. Moments later, we can see Gennosuke Kouga alone in his room, thinking about Oboro and his enemies, when suddenly Kajero enters, who mentions that tomorrow they will leave by boat to continue their journey. Gennosuke Kouga affirms, although he also briefly debates whether or not it will be safer to go on foot along a different route. After this, he asks the girl if she needs anything else, to which he answers by asking what he thinks. Gennosuke Kouga responds that he should already know, so the girl asks if it is Oboro. At the same time, Hyoma confesses that before leaving, Danjo told her that Kajero should soon find a partner for herself, but they wonder how many men would be willing to risk such a risk to be with her. That's when Hyoma reveals that from what he understands, there are many men willing to try, because the girl has undeniable beauty. Returning to Gennosuke Kouga, he looks surprised when the girl pounces on him, begging him to hug her. Immediately afterwards, it begins to absorb Gennosuke Kouga's energy in a similar way to how Akoi did, so Gennosuke desperately uses his abilities to push her back. The girl then tells him that she wants to die right there next to him, to which he responds by telling him that if he no longer wants to live, he should at least wait until they finish off the ninjas on Iga's list. Upon hearing this, the girl sadly responds that with her technique she cannot defeat women. That's when he questions Gennosuke Kouga if he will be able to finish off Oboro. At the same time, we see how Hadarubai's snake approaches them without being detected. Just then, Gennosuke Kouga responds by stating that he will take care of the girl, which gives Kajero peace of mind. Suddenly, the snake pounces on them, but Gennosuke Kouga notices and quickly uses his sword to cut off its head. Unfortunately, the snake manages to spit out some of its venom, which lands on Gennosuke Kouga's eyes, leaving them sealed. After this, we can see Nenki and Harurubai hiding and observing the situation, happy to have fulfilled their plan. At that moment, the Kouga members come out of their rooms to investigate. That's when the Iga ninjas notice that Jayabu is not with the group, so they assume he's probably using his abilities to sneak up on Oboro and the rest. Consequently, Nenki orders his companion to return to her group and inform them that they cannot let their guard down. She accepts and proceeds to use her abilities to disappear, which alerts Zeman and Kajero, who come to investigate. Meanwhile, the furry Iga ninja prepares to fight, with the aim of making Tenzin notice what he is capable of doing alone. He then proceeds to enter the room where Gennosuke Kouga is and finds him next to Hayoma. Despite being blind, they both notice his presence and let him know. Nenki, completely confident, begins to mock his rival's condition, commenting on who he should kill first. That's when, against all odds, Gennosuke Kouga orders Hayoma to observe his enemy, to which he responds by mocking even more. Then, Hayoma opens his eyes, and he uses Gennosuke's eye power to force his enemy to use his own hair to shred his entire body. At the same time, we see Zeman and Kajero chasing Harurubai, who tries to quickly escape using her butterflies. During the chase, the boy manages to hurt her after throwing a knife at her, however he manages to escape anyway. So Zeman orders his partner to return to Gennosuke Kouga and keep an eye on him, while he proceeds to continue his pursuit. This is when it is revealed to us that Harurubai did not escape, but rather hid on a roof while using her butterflies as a decoy. After this, we see the girl remember with deep hatred the words of Zeman and Jayabu, who murdered her lover, a fact that makes her regain strength and bandage the wound to continue her mission. On the other hand, sheltered in a small cabin, we can see the Iga group, those who wonder if their companions have fulfilled their mission to find the Kouga, and praying that they haven't been reckless and end up digging their own graves. To which Jingoro mentions, repentant, that he should have killed Gennosuke Kouga when he had the opportunity, while spying on him in the village. But he adds that it is not something his boss Oboro would have wanted, then proceeds to make reference to the girl's crush. But he takes it back and chooses not to say it. Meanwhile, Oboro remembers the moments when she met with her lover to practice her performance for the engagement ceremony. In the memory, the girl sadly tells him that before accepting the responsibility of a marriage agreement, she would like to be completely sure that he has no doubts about it, adding that if he would just exclaim to her that she is the only woman he loves, they could become a good couple. Upon hearing this, Gennosuke Kouga looks at her intently and tells her that every time he looks into her eyes he feels happy to have found her. He then proceeds to add that he is not good at that type of conversation, to which the girl responds by saying that she is not good at it either. He then adds that the harsh winter has finally ended, and the girl mentions that she was looking forward to the change of season. After this, the memory ends and Iga's group can hear their poor leader crying in the next room. Returning to Zeman, we can see him running at full speed after the decoy that the enemy sent. But he stops once he discovers that it is a hoax, after throwing a knife at himself and seeing how the illusion disappears. At that moment, he remembers the hateful words he received from the girl earlier, and after a few seconds, he leaves. On the other hand, we can see Harurubai walking slowly through the forest, being affected by the pain of her wound. When trying to cross over the trunk of a fallen tree, he slips and falls. A while later, we see Zeman returning to his people. Upon entering, the boy is surprised to see Nenki's impaled and crushed corpse, whom he recognizes after a few moments, remembering him as the man who murdered his sister Akoi. At that moment, Hayoma asks him what happened to his chase, but he answers that his enemy deceived him using a decoy, and he managed to escape. The blind man asks where the butterflies were going, and the boy mentions that they were moving towards the east. Knowing this, Gennosuke Kouga intervenes, theorizing that Harurubai probably headed west. Seconds later, suddenly, during a fit of rage, Zeman grabs the hairy ninja's corpse and throws it to the ground, a fact that surprises his colleagues. Returning to the Iga, we eventually get to see them sleeping through the night, when at a certain moment, Aikjanu, believing that she is the only one awake, gets up and leaves the cabin. But as soon as he closes the door, we can see that Tenzin notices this. Next, outside, we can see Kashiro, who has recovered from his injury, practicing his wind skills, while he thinks about the result of his previous battle, coming to the conclusion that if Oboro had not intervened at that time, perhaps he would have been defeated by Gennosuke and his eye technique, which makes him wonder if this is a man or some kind of demon. At that moment, Kashiro hears a noise in the water and is terrified as he begins to feel a presence behind him. The poor boy paranoidly thinks that they could be his enemies, and after a few seconds, he draws his weapon and launches an attack backwards. But this person turns out to be Aikjanu, who manages to stop the boy and calm him down. After a few seconds, Kashiro jerks back and falls into a small river. The girl approaches to assist him, but he, frustrated by his inability, mentions to his partner that he feels truly pathetic. Ikejino then picks him up and hugs him to comfort him. Returning to Hatarubai, she finds herself lying on the ground after her fall, feeling her wound bleeding. Just then, he begins to remember the moment when his beloved Yashimaru was chosen to go to Sunpu. This came really excited to tell him, revealing that the old woman Ojin considered him to be mature enough. They talk about the trip for a moment, when the boy mentions that the peace treaty isn't so bad after all, as he holds his lover's hand gently against his face. Remembering this gives Hatarubai the strength to get up and continue on her way. Returning to the Iga, Ikejinu asks Kashiro what he thinks of Oboro, because due to the separation with Gennosuke Kouga, she should help them kill him, but at the same time, she understands the girl's feelings, adding that he feels very sorry for her and that I hope she can forget about Gennosuke. Kashiro responds by saying that if that were possible, he might still be able to see Oboro, but he adds that thanks to his blindness, the only thing he can see in his mind is his leader, soaked to the skin by the rain. After this conversation, Ikejinu returns to the cabin. As soon as she enters, Oboro asks her what is happening, to which she responds by saying that everything is fine and that she should continue sleeping. The Iga leader responds by expressing that she does not want to lose anyone else no matter what. After this we can see Gennosuke Kouga and Oboro thinking about each other. On the other hand, we see Hatarubai in the rain, in front of a bridge that has been cut. The girl looks desperate, until suddenly she sees Nenki arrive, who is actually Zeman in disguise, who tells him to be happy, because he has already finished off Gennosuke. Next, returning to the Kouga, we see Kajero cleaning Gennosuke Kouga's eyes with a damp cloth. When at that moment, Hayoma questions Gennosuke Kouga what they should do now, asking if, even knowing the state of his eyes, he plans to go to Sunpu anyway. Gennosuke replies that the reason for the trip is to find out the Shogun's true intentions, and that they cannot return without having an answer. He also adds that they knew that the Iga ninjas would attack them, and yet none of these attacks have intimidated them, so they won't do it in Sunpu either. After reassuring his partner, Gennosuke Kouga mentions that as soon as Zeman returns they will retire. After saying this, Gennosuke Kouga goes outside and thinks that this trip is a path to hell, from which no one can return. Returning to Hatarubai, she cannot believe what her partner has told her, so he tells him to be happy, because he alone managed to kill Gennosuke and his men. The girl incredulously asks him if what he says is true, to which he replies that Gennosuke Kouga can't do anything if he can't see. Next, she asks how he did with Hayoma, but he replies that defeating him was easier than cutting radishes. After this, he adds that he also finished off Kajero, who was immersed in the illusion of butterflies, so he states that now they only have one enemy left to defeat, and they will have won the war. The girl then asks if he also took care of Zeman, but he responds by saying that unfortunately he let him go. After the girl told him that it surprised her coming from him, he told her not to be so harsh. Later he exclaims that Kajero confessed in his last breath that the one who killed Yashimaru was Zeman. Upon hearing this, the girl gets excited, and reproaches him again that she is surprised that someone with his abilities would have let him escape like that. After this, he exclaims that he must have been the one who murdered him, but he soon realizes that this represents that perhaps it is his destiny to be the one to end Zeman's life, to which he answers, asking her if she will be able to achieve it, warning him that he is a ninja with the ability to change his face to that of any other human being. The girl responds that it doesn't really matter since she claims that she will be able to recognize him, assuring that she will take care of him. Just then, while the girl is holding her partner's hand, she notices that he has a bandage on his finger, just like Yashimaru had after the snake bit him, so he ends up discovering who is really in front of him. Zeman then confirms that he has been able to see through her disguise. The girl immediately backs away, but he quickly follows her. As they go into the air, Hatarubai manages to land a kick on him and make him retreat. After this, he tries to use his abilities, but Zeman manages to cut off both of his hands with a sword blow, to later brutally pierce the girl with his weapon. She remains nailed to a rock, suspended over the cliff, while her murderer stares at her from the bridge. Later, while dying, Hatarubai manages to see her beloved Yashimaru again, so that moments later, it is permanently eliminated after falling into the void. Zeman remains silent for a moment, when suddenly, many of the girl's butterflies rise into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. The next day, in a place called Kuwana Harbor, we see the Iga ninjas boarding a boat. At that moment, we hear Jingoro complain about the decision to go by boat since it will be a long trip, and due to its nature, it melts when it comes into contact with salt, as we have seen in its previous battles, exclaiming that everyone knows what would happen if he were to fall into the water. Hearing this, Tenzin orders him to stop complaining, since they won't even have to swim or anything, to which he responds, saying that he knows but that doesn't mean he can't feel afraid. After this, Tenzin states that there is no indication that the Kouga have taken a ship in that port, so he deduces that they must have taken a land route, commenting that, therefore, they should be able to overtake them. Upon hearing this, Ikejinu worriedly reminds her companion that both Hatarubai and Nenki have not returned, and he asks if it is really necessary to continue advancing by boat, to which Tenzin responds by saying that they can't afford to wait for people they've lost contact with, adding that if they have not returned they already know what it means. At that moment it is revealed to us that there is someone hiding on the ship watching them. Eventually the ship sets sail, and we can see Oboro remembering the words that Gennosuke expressed in his letter, in which he counted her as one of the 7 remaining ninjas of Iga, that is, as his enemy. The girl is certain that Gennosuke Kouga believes that she intentionally set a trap for him, but the girl confesses that all she wants is for him to know that he didn't do such a thing. At that moment, due to the strong waves, Oboro stumbles, but is helped by Kishiro, who is watching over her. She thanks him and takes his hand, which surprises the boy, who seems to have loving feelings for her. That's when Gennosuke appears, looking for Oboro and asking him to go inside the ship, stating that being outside is dangerous, to which the girl responds that this is her first trip and that at least it allows her to enjoy the smell of the sea, in addition to the sound of the waves and the singing of birds, since it is your first time experiencing something like this. Just then, a flutist on the other side of the ship starts playing a song, which Oboro manages to hear and automatically remembers Gennosuke. They are all good memories until he remembers that they are now enemies. Just then the music stops and people cheer for the musicians. After this, the girl takes Gennosuke's hand and pronounces Gennosuke Kouga's name, which causes Kishiro to quickly retreat, as well as making Tenzin angry. Later, he asks Gennosuke to go with Jingoro to another room, stating that there is something he wants to talk to Oboro about in private. He also asks her to have Kishiro guard the main cabin and make sure no one enters. The girl asks, intrigued, what all this is about, to which they reply that they will probably confront the Kouga when the ship reaches port. However, Oboro's thoughts seem to be elsewhere, so you would like to know what your feelings are while you are still at sea, and make sure you hold your ground. Upon hearing this, Gennosuke worriedly asks him what he will do if Oboro does not give in, to which he responds by saying that there is no need to worry, since the girl will give in without fail. Next, we can see 2 men walking around the ship, who are scared when they see Kishiro sitting on the ground, giving Tenzin the time to carry out his goal. On the other hand, we see Jingoro asking his companion when they will arrive at the port, but she cannot respond due to concern. We then see Tenzin approach Oboro, who notices his presence and identity, so the girl asks him where the others are, but he responds by commenting that they are in another cabin. Hearing this, she asks the reason, but just then Tenzin kneels and whispers to her that he has something to tell her. Next, we see Gennosuke Kouga with his eyes already healed walking alongside his companions, 2 of whom have their faces covered, when he talks about someone once said that the path to reconciliation between the Kouga and the Iga, it would be found when they got to know each other. However, shedding their own blood and firmly believing in that destiny are now the only path they can take. After this, in a memory, we can see Oboro and Gennosuke Kouga chatting calmly where the girl mentions that she believes that they both used to be one soul in the past and now they are separated, seeking to unite again, exclaiming that she is truly attracted to Gennosuke. After saying this, she apologizes for her forwardness. Gennosuke Kouga answers that if their souls were one, then they would feel mutually attracted. He then stands up and adds that it does not matter how separated their souls may be, nor how many times they have to reincarnate. At that moment, Gennosuke interrupts what he is saying and approaches the girl, crouching in front of her. After this, he tells her that he knows why the girl closed her eyes the night before, to which she responds by bowing her head, sad. So Gennosuke Kouga asks him to close his eyes again. The girl does so and Gennosuke approaches to kiss her, but when he is about to do so they are interrupted by Kishiro. At that moment, Gennosuke Kouga notices the wooden statuettes that Oboro has in his room, while the girl is attending to her partner. Returning to the present, we see Kishiro sitting on the floor of the ship, carving a wooden figurine while a boy watches him. The little boy seems to really like what the boy does, so he decides to carve a new figure. That's when the boy's father realizes where his son is, so he quickly approaches and takes him away, after apologizing for disturbing him. While they leave, Kishiro gives the boy a small statuette of a toad. He thanks it and leaves. Returning to Tenzin, he continues with his plan to convince his leader to stand firm in the face of the clan's situation, stating that you have something important to say. That's when Tenzin asks him if he still maintains his position of not being able to fight Gennosuke, to which the girl answers that even if she had to fight, she can't see. So he reminds her that she will only remain blind for 7 nights, so they only have to wait 5 more days. At that moment the girl comments that she must die at the hands of Gennosuke before that time passes. Hearing this only confirms Tenzin's fears, so he tells Oboro that he leaves him no choice. The girl asks if he is going to kill her, but he responds negatively, proceeding to approach the girl and tell her that he will be in charge of pouring the essence of the Iga into her, so that she is forced to see Gennosuke Kouga as her enemy. Tenzin then asks Oboro to be his wife, to which the girl responds by trying to slap him, but he stops her, and using his strength to subdue her, he tries to abuse her, stating that it is the only way for him to forget about Gennosuke. At that moment, from outside, Kishiro hears the girl scream, which causes him to cut himself and drop his statuette. That's when Tenzin tells Oboro that she was raised to be the leader of Iga, adding that of the 10 ninjas selected, only Jingoro, Kishiro, and him remain, so she has to decide which of them is worthy of helping her continue her lineage. The girl desperately asks him to kill her, since she doesn't want to choose any, to which Tenzin responds that as the visible leader of Iga he has the obligation to continue living. After this, the girl tries to call the other Iga ninjas, but Tenzin silences her, stating that they all agree with his plan. So he continues to abuse poor Oboro. It is there, when after hearing her screams again, Kishiro wonders what is happening, and he begins to use his powers uncontrollably. There we discover that the rest of the passengers have realized that there is a problem, including Gennosuke and Jingoro, which continue to be watched by the mysterious man from before, who turns out to be Jayabu. Immediately, the passengers calm down and we can see them cheering for the little boy to whom Kishiro gave the statuette, since this one does a somersault skillfully for his age. After this we hear Jingoro scream in panic, due to his paranoia and fear of salt water. Just then, the boy unintentionally drops his wooden toad on him, causing him to scream again. After this, Gennosuke calms him down, letting him know that it is just a statuette. Afterwards, Jayabu disappears, leaving his disguise behind, a fact that is noticed by Jingoro, who realizes that all the passengers are not there, later stating that only one is missing. Therefore, together with his partner they decide to go out to investigate. At the same time, Kishiro finds himself in a dilemma, since he considers that Tenzin is the best one to stay with Oboro. But at the same time, it hurts him immensely to hear her scream like that. He considers what he should do for a few moments, but upon hearing Oboro shout his name for help, he makes up his mind. So he crawls as quickly as he can into the room to stop Tenzin. Just upon arrival, we see Tenzin being strangled by Jayabu, who suspends him in the air, and after a few seconds destroys his neck, to later use his abilities to disappear again in front of them, who are not even aware of his presence. Next, Kishiro and Oboro, both blind, notice Tenzin's corpse and wonder what has happened. Just then, Jayabu appears again behind the girl, ready to eliminate her as well. But when he is about to complete his task, he is interrupted by Jingoro and Gennosuke, who arrive quickly. That's when they realize the body and what it means, stating that because of the way he acts, it must be Jayabu, who is on the boat with them. So suddenly, terrified, Jingoro begins to throw swords into the air erratically, to later run outside with his sword. Seeing this, Gennosuke asks Kishiro to take care of Oboro and proceeds to follow his crazed companion, who upon leaving the room begins to shout and brandish his weapon, with the aim of hitting his invisible enemy with it. But upon seeing this, a man from the ship's crew tries to stop him, receiving a sword blow in the attempt and dying instantly. Jingoro is then grabbed tightly by the foot, causing him to stumble and drop his sword. Next, Jayabu shows himself as Jingoro requested, and after lifting the gray ninja in his arms, he throws him towards the sea. Once it falls into the water, it begins to disintegrate. And while his companion is dying and begging for his life, Gennosuke also throws himself into the sea to assist him. But this is of no use, since when he reaches his companion he notices that it is too late. After this, Jayabu prepares to finish off the remaining ninjas, but he is totally shocked to discover that Tenzin is still alive. Returning to Gennosuke Kouga, he and his companions almost reach the port, and they wonder if Iga's ninjas beat them to it as they predicted. To which one of the masked men responds that if they didn't do it then there was no point in taking the land route. Suddenly Gennosuke Kouga mentions that at that precise moment Jayabu must be fighting against the Iga, adding that no one can stop him from feeling the way he does. Returning to Jayabu, he is really surprised that his enemy is still alive since he swears that he had destroyed his neck. Tenzin takes the opportunity to mock his rival, asking him if he thinks he is a ghost. Out of nowhere, he draws his weapon and quickly throws it at Jayabu, who dodges it by sinking to the floor of the ship. After this, Tenzin picks up his weapon while admitting that his rival's ability is really useful, since he could escape easily, to which he responds that he cannot stop trembling because of the excitement he feels knowing that he will kill them all. After hearing this, Tenzin looks around and prepares for the attack, while all the passengers look at him expectantly. At that moment, we see how a crew member of the ship throws a rope to Gennosuke to get him on the ship again. After this, we see Tenzin sinking into paranoia, being affected by the noises around him and throwing swords into the air, which causes his rival to make fun of him. Upon hearing his jokes, he comments that unfortunately his sword was not made to eliminate the Kouga, if the way they fight is by hiding. To which Jayabu replies that, in fact, that is the Iga way of fighting. After mentioning this, he proceeds to remind him of his clan's betrayal during the Oda invasion in the past, in which the body of a retired leader of the Kouga appeared abandoned in the surroundings of his village. So Jayabu accuses the Iga of having caused his death, which Tenzin partially confirms to provoke his rival. Immediately afterwards, the Iga ninja moves quickly and without warning takes the life of one of the crew members. To be more precise, the same one who helped Gennosuke up. After seeing this, the rest of the passengers fear for their safety, while Tenzin uses this to his advantage, mentioning to Jayabu that someone just died because of him hiding, calling him a sinner. But his blackmail doesn't work, because Kouga's big guy is more than aware of the atrocities the Iga commit, as if to be affected by moral dilemmas. At that moment, Jayabu reveals part of his body, although it is still hidden behind some containers. He then proceeds to mention that he will never forget what happened that day. That's when in a memory we see Jayabu as a child, training with his father, which he had the opportunity to attack from behind during a session, but he ended up hesitating about his attack, for which his father ends up hitting him and telling him that this weakness will one day bring him death, adding that he can't feel sorry for his enemies and that ninjas don't need any kind of mercy. Later, we see how Jayabu's father prepares to approach the Iga clan on Danjo's orders. After saying goodbye to his son, he thinks about how the hatred between the Iga and Kouga clans will not be able to disappear so easily. But nevertheless, so much bloodshed does not make any sense, adding that he would not mind living in peace with his son. Eventually, while walking with his group, they are attacked by surprise. Sensing this, Jayabu, who is hovering nearby, desperately runs to see what is happening. Finding his father badly injured and about to die, the boy worries, but his dying father only answers that a ninja does not need mercy, dying a few seconds later. There we found out that after that the peace treaty was signed between both clans, so Jayabu was unable to avenge his father, forcing him to make the decision to finish them off personally. Returning to the present, he claims that his hatred for the Iga is his only motivation, adding that that day he put aside all his piety. Upon hearing this, Tenzin laughs and mentions that both Jayabu and his father can die without having seen hell. Then, the big guy throws a wooden box towards Tenzin, leaving the boy from before and his father exposed. They quickly flee inside the ship, but when they are on their way, the boy drops a flute and goes back to look for it. Meanwhile, Jayabu throws another heavy box towards Tenzin, who dodges it without problem. Next, taking advantage of the fact that his enemy does not see him, the big guy appears behind him and tries to grab him again. But Tenzin is very agile and manages to avoid his grip, hit him in the ribs and land a kick that sends him back to the ground. After this, Jayabu picks up his rival's sword, which he dropped during his previous attack. Seeing him again, Tenzin provokes him by saying that he had already forgotten his idiotic face, to which the other answers, suggesting that he remember it well, so that he does not confuse him with a demon in hell. Next, the big guy attacks with his sword, but Tenzin manages to defend himself. Just at that moment, in the middle of the fight, the boy reaches out to grab the flute from the ground. But Jayabu, with no intention of stopping, continues his attack, which is received by the child's father, who intervenes to protect him. Seeing his father lying lifeless on the ground, the boy cries uncontrollably, fact that relives all the traumas inside Jayabu, distracting him from the fight. That's when Gennosuke appears, and uses his abilities to help Tenzin. Upon noticing his presence, the big man tries to flee by entering one of the walls of the ship. But being bathed in Gennosuke's blood, Tenzin is able to sense where he is, so he quickly approaches him and pierces the wall with his weapon, in turn passing through the body of his enemy, who dies a few moments later. Meanwhile, everyone on the ship looks shocked at what has happened. Afterwards, Tenzin crosses Jayabu's name off his list, as well as those of his fallen comrades, Nenki and Hararubai, which leaves both clans with only 4 members remaining on each side. Later, at a place called the Sakai Bridge, Gennosuke Kouga and his companions encounter a terrible sight, since the Iga ninjas decided to leave the wall board on which Jayabu was murdered prostrate at the entrance of the bridge. After finding him, his companions decide to say goodbye to the big guy by bringing him flowers and letting him float adrift on the sea. That night, after saying goodbye to his partner, Gennosuke Kouga and his team continue their trip to the Sunpu Palace. Motivated by Jayabu's memories, they walk in the dark when at a certain moment, they observe a falcon flying over them with a scroll. Kajero immediately approaches to shoot him down and get the message, but as he runs, he notices that it is Iga's Ojin falcon. So he mentions that now that he has no owner, he may be controlled by Oboro, which makes it advance with more intensity. While Gennosuke Kouga and Kajero go in search of the falcon, their other 2 companions remain behind. That's when we discover that these 2 are being watched by Tenzin, who is hiding in the undergrowth. He deduces from the tone of their voices that they are Hyoma and Zeman, who still have their faces covered. Next, Tenzin proceeds to approach, prepared to attack. As he walks stealthily, he thinks about how Nenki, despite having carried the ointment of the Dark Seven with him, he failed to use it to seal Gennosuke Kouga's eyes before dying. At that moment, out of nowhere, one of the Kouga members turns around, letting Tenzin know that they are aware of his presence. Upon hearing this, Tenzin is shocked, as he recognizes the voice of the speaker. At that moment, we discover that the people chasing the falcon are really Kajero and Zeman disguised as Gennosuke Kouga, who, as they run, notice that the hawk seems to be mocking them. That's when they perceive a strange individual behind a tree, who seems to be controlling the bird. They then attack both the mysterious character and the bird, obtaining the scroll as a result, but letting the person who controlled him flee. After this, they collect the document, while Kajero assures that their enemy must not be far away, to which Zeman comments that since there are 2, his opponent would not be so reckless as to attack, stating that he must let him go, and adding that by not being able to sense his presence, it is probably not Oboro. Plus the fact that the girl's eyes can override their techniques, so it would also be unwise for them to continue. And more important than anything, the simple fact that they chased the falcon indicates that they may have fallen into an Iga trap, so they decide to run back. Returning to Gennosuke Kouga, we see that Tenzin realizes that he was deceived and that in reality the one who chased the falcon was Zeman. Gennosuke Kouga then removes his face covering, revealing his closed eyes, which makes his enemy laugh and congratulate Nenki and Harurubai for having managed to take Gennosuke's sight away. Tenzin approaches while mentioning to his rivals that both are worthy of appearing on Kouga's list of 10 chosen ninjas, stating that they managed to fool him, but that the show was a waste of time, since in the same way, no one can see. At that moment, Hayoma intervenes saying that in fact they did see it, in their minds, and he thanks him for allowing them to say goodbye and pay their respects to their fallen comrade, referring to Jayabu. After hearing this, Tenzin congratulates him for lying so well and proceeds to quickly attack him with his sword, asking him if he can see that with his mind too. But Hayoma manages to dodge the attack by taking a couple of steps back, although he ends up losing the garment that covered his face. Next, while Tenzin holds his weapon in front of his blind adversary, he confesses to Gennosuke Kouga that he planned to let him live to the end, adding that he was going to kill him after he witnessed the annihilation of his clan and his marriage to Oboro. But nevertheless, its destiny has reached the end of its cycle. Upon hearing this, Gennosuke Kouga calmly tells Tenzin to leave, and he reminds him that they only plan to go to Sunpu to confirm the retired shogun's intentions. He then asks if he would be able to take his remaining ninjas back to Iga and wait there, commenting that depending on the circumstances, everything that has happened in the present and during the war, just as in the last 400 years of hatred that has led up to that moment, they will be forgotten and their consequences forgiven. At this point, Hayoma adds that both sides have suffered countless losses, and he asks if they couldn't consider that what's been happening during the ninja conflict has brought them all to a draw, adding that they should break the bonds of hatred. He also mentions that they tell him everything, understanding that he is Oboro's representative as leader of Iga. Hayoma ends the speech, adding that this is the Kouga clan leader's true wish. All these words make Tenzin laugh, who reproaches Gennosuke Kouga for becoming so soft and questions the reasons for his challenge in Sunpu. Upon hearing this, Hayoma replies that many Kouga members hate Iga's guts. This causes Tenzin to mock him, suggesting that his blind ninja ability is to talk pretty. Immediately afterwards, the Iga ninja proceeds to pounce on him to finish him off once and for all, to which Hayoma reacts by dodging each and every attack he receives, until at a certain point he manages to block Tenzin's sword, stopping it just before his head is cut off. That's when Gennosuke Kouga approaches, telling Tenzin that he won't be able to witness his wedding with Oboro, because he will die right there in front of him. Completely confident, Tenzin scoffs again, but then Hayoma asks Gennosuke Kouga for permission to open his eyes and he grants it. Then, the blind boy opens his eyes and uses his eye technique to make Tenzin decapitate himself. Although they manage to kill him, his head is not completely cut off. This is when it is revealed to us that Hayoma is Gennosuke's teacher, and that he has exactly the same eye technique as him. Since Gennosuke Kouga mentions that he will not be able to easily surpass his teacher, but he adds that he is nothing more than his nightly substitute. Upon hearing this, Gennosuke Kouga expresses that he feels desperate, and that he knows how much his companions care about him. But Hayoma responds by exclaiming that she understands his feelings, but that the hatred they feel for the Iga is too deep, adding that at that moment each of them carries a burden that prevents them from seeing things differently. He also comments that if they had known about the annulment of the treaty before their enemies, they could have done things differently, to which Gennosuke Kouga mentions that they can no longer go back in time. After this conversation, his other two companions arrive, and they finally meet. After calming down, the Kouga members read the scroll with the names of the deceased. There they discover that Jingoro's name has also been crossed out, so they assume that Jayabu managed to take care of him before he died. After this, Kajero informs Gennosuke that the falcon managed to escape along with the person controlling it, to which he responds by saying that the next time they see a hawk they have to kill it along with the owner. This surprises his companions, who ask what they should do if this person was Oboro, to which he replies that it doesn't really matter, since she is still an Iga woman, therefore they should finish her off too. Upon hearing this, Hayoma intervenes saying that they should not be so surprised, mentioning that Gennosuke Kouga ordered him to look at Tenzin, and reminding them that the same thing happened with Nenki, which is why Gennosuke showed himself to be quite determined to finish off his enemies. After this, Zeman asks his companions to continue advancing with Gennosuke Kouga, since he has some pending issues with the dead man, stating that not knowing his ninja technique this would be the most powerful enemy, but he unexpectedly turned out to be very easy to kill. Next, further on, in the Takedo area, we can see Aikjanu giving Oboro a bath, who apologizes for his insistence, to which Aikjanu replies that there is no problem, mentioning that the sea breeze makes the skin feel sticky, adding that she must have felt quite uncomfortable at that moment. We see that Oboro only thinks about what happened with Tenzin on the ship, when he tried to abuse her, and we find out that this is the real reason why he insisted on taking a bath. After this, Oboro asks if the flutist who died on the ship was a traveling artist, wondering where they could be at that time. Aikjanu tries to reassure her, commenting that perhaps they are at an inn or have continued on their way. Upon hearing this, Oboro expresses that he wishes he could hear them play again, To continue reassuring her, Gennosuke mentions that perhaps they could meet them again during the trip. Next, the Iga leader asks about Kashiro, and expresses that she would like to apologize to him, adding that she has made him suffer. Furthermore, he mentions that if possible, he would like to do it before Tenzin returns from his reconnaissance of the terrain. But this will not be possible because the boy accompanied Tenzin in his task, with the aim of helping him kill Hayoma before night falls. Hearing this, Oboro worries because Kashiro obviously can't see, and Gennosuke admits to him that she tried to stop them too. At that moment, during a flashback, we discover that Gennosuke has romantic feelings for Kashiro, which Tenzin perceives in his concern for the boy, but nevertheless, this does not persuade him not to take him with him on the mission, stating that they are not on a pleasure trip and that they should focus on their goals. Eventually, we return to Kashiro, who wanders in the dead of night looking for Tenzin and remembering his words, in which he mentioned that what happened on the ship was nothing more than a strategy to make the Kouga come out of hiding. After this, the boy continues moving aimlessly, desperately searching for his partner. As he walks, he wonders all kinds of things and constantly thinks about Oboro and his feelings for her. He is motivated by thinking that he must protect her in the village where he grew up. But during his spiral of despair he trips, and when he gets up he thinks about what he can do in that state, wondering what happened to Gennosuke Kouga's feelings for Oboro, and wondering if he really plans to allow all this to continue, coming to the conclusion that he is still a Kouga ninja after all and wishing that they did not exist. On the other hand, we see Gennosuke Kouga and his group advance on their journey when out of nowhere, Hayoma, after feeling the heaviness of his steps, he wonders if Gennosuke Kouga still has doubts inside, but he affirms that things will probably continue their course and there will be no mercy for anyone, adding that, as someone who was entrusted with the care of his nephew, he may be making a mistake. But he adds that Gennosuke will be able to continue hesitating alone until he is the last of the Kouga ninja standing. While thinking, Hayoma is interrupted by the presence of someone approaching them from behind. Upon realizing it, they realize that it is Kashiro, who, with the help of the falcon, managed to find them. At that moment, it is revealed to us that during the course of that same day, one of the heirs to the position of shogun was poisoned. Fortunately, the child survived. Consequently, his caregiver was determined not to allow the attack to go unnoticed. He goes to the retired shogun to tell him about the situation, but she is persuaded not to do it and wait a little longer due to how delicate the issue of the succession dispute is. Returning to the present, Gennosuke Kouga's group encounters Kashiro, who without hesitation attacks them with his wind abilities. Her attack almost hits Kajero, but she is saved by Gennosuke, who pulls her out of the way at just the right moment. Next, Kashiro attacks again, throwing his weapon quickly towards Gennosuke Kouga, who manages to evade the sickle and hide in the undergrowth with his companions. That's when Hayoma asks these two to leave, so they have time to advance while he takes care of Kashiro, who just at that moment attacks again, almost bringing them closer. After this, Kajero flees with Gennosuke Kouga, but upon noticing him, Kashiro prepares to go after them. However, he is intercepted by Hayoma, who quickly jumps on him to give him a sword blow. Kashiro manages to defend himself, and both blind men proceed to struggle while Gennosuke Kouga and Kajero take the opportunity to escape. That's when the Iga ninja notices that he is running out of time and decides to use his wind abilities again. But while he is about to attack his opponent, Hayoma opens his eyes to locate and subsequently evade the attack, making both ninjas step back. At that moment, we discover that Kashiro uses the falcon as a method to know the location of his enemies, since he is waiting for the bird's signal to know where Hayoma is positioned. What he doesn't know is that his feathered friend left along with Gennosuke Kouga and Kajero, who try to get rid of him by throwing knives at him. At the same time, we see that one of Kashiro's attacks managed to hurt Hayoma's ear. Eventually, they resume their battle when he decides to trick the Iga ninja by throwing an object near him, all in order to make noise and be able to attack from another angle. The trick works, as Kashiro attacks the decoy first, but Hayoma fails to land his attack, because the sickle that his rival had thrown at the decoy rotated until it intercepted him too. However, Hayoma manages to defend the attack and retreat. Kashiro then channels his wind vacuum and after a few seconds releases it, destroying his rival's face. At that moment, during a flashback, we see how Hayoma met Gennosuke Kouga and was ordered to become his teacher, teaching him to use his eye technique. At that time, Gennosuke was just a child, so your teacher's unconventional methods were taxing on his patience, because he was impatient to be taught how to use the eye technique. But the training only consisted of walking around the valley blindfolded, which frustrated little Gennosuke a lot, who only wanted to learn the technique to become stronger and be able to protect his clan. Noticing his frustration, Hayoma tries to persuade him by mentioning that if his enemies discover that he is capable of using said power, the first thing they will do is shoot him in the eyes, so he must consider the possibility of acting without needing to see. This only annoys Gennosuke even more, but he continues with the training nonetheless. At one point in his blind journey through the valley, during one of his tantrums, Hayoma asks him to be careful, because the area they are in can be dangerous. Upon hearing this, Gennosuke Kouga quickly removes the blindfold, only to realize that they are climbing a mountain and are just inches from a cliff. Later, as night falls, Hayoma bandages Gennosuke Kouga's wound while telling him about the secret of his technique, stating that the world is a complex place, but that as long as it is able to fix its gaze on the laws that govern the chaotic world, it will be possible for him to see everything with his eyes, exclaiming that the secret of his technique is the law of all living beings. Upon hearing this, Gennosuke asks what that law is, but his teacher replies that if he knew everything it would have been easier. This causes Gennosuke Kouga to call him cruel and run away. Later, while the boy is walking through the forest, he is intercepted and cornered by a wild wolf. It is just that moment in which Gennosuke Kouga uses his ocular technique for the first time, making the wolf leave. Then his tutor arrives to assist him and the boy ends up hugging him to get over the shock. As time passes, Hayoma realizes that Danjo was right when he said that Gennosuke had great potential to use that technique. But he adds that he is still a very innocent boy, unable to appreciate the beauty and ugliness of the world. However, he mentions that a law that could obscure those eyes may not be necessary. Next, he returns to Gennosuke Kouga's room but notices that he is not in his bed. But instead, the boy is outside, ready to train. They continue their journey, blindly exploring the forest and climbing the steep mountain, which, at a certain moment, almost claimed the life of Gennosuke, who stumbled during his walk and fell into the void. But he is quickly rescued by Hayoma, who takes him by the hand and takes him back up. Later, upon reaching the top, his teacher asks Gennosuke Kouga to remove the blindfold. But surprisingly, he refuses, stating that he already understands what he meant by the law of the world, adding that the sun shines like never before, and that glow not only shines on Kouga but also on the Iga clan. At that moment we return to the present, where the dying Hayoma begs Gennosuke Kouga to stay alive. He leans on his sword, while Kashiro paranoidly thinks he hasn't heard him fall to the ground. But at the same time he is aware that he succeeded in the attack, so he does not know if he truly defeated him. He then grabs his gun and moves it erratically while shouting. Next, we see how the falcon arrives at the inn where Oboro and Gennosuke are, but they notice that the bird is behaving strangely, so they assume the worst. Returning to Kashiro, he is really panicked, not knowing what to do, when suddenly he hears Gennosuke's voice. At the same time, we learn that the tutor of one of the shogun's heirs moves suspiciously at night in a carriage. Gennosuke then reveals to Kashiro that his opponent, Hayoma, has died standing and is behind him. He realizes that for this reason he never heard him fall to the ground, stating that this makes him a great man. After saying this, Kashiro questions Gennosuke about what she is doing there, asking if something has happened at the inn, and immediately demanding to know how Oboro is doing. That's when Gennosuke, who has not yet shown himself, tells him crying that they were attacked by Zeman, who suddenly attacked them and dedicated himself to torturing Oboro to death. Hearing this drives the poor boy crazy, and he throws himself on the ground, reproaching himself for not being able to protect her. He then repeatedly hits the ground with his weapons while shouting that he will never forgive whoever did it. After this, Kashiro, enraged, asks Gennosuke what she was doing at that moment. But she quickly responds that she was tied hand and foot, and that as soon as she had a chance, she tried to escape, adding that he thought he should inform him and Tenzin, even if he was risking death. Reason why she appears before him, ashamed for not having been able to do anything to prevent the death of her leader. Upon hearing all this, the boy responds really upset that he didn't want to hear something like that. But while he is complaining, he is interrupted by the girl, who approaches him mentioning that she has not come to complain. Seconds later, she hugs him and implores the boy to kill her while she cries. Next, he announces that Iga is lost and that at least the two of them should die together. Next, even though Kashiro almost manages to resist, the girl kisses him and after a few seconds he falls to the ground. It is immediately revealed to us that this was actually Kajero, who was taking advantage of his enemy's blindness. He set a trap with Zeman, who, disguised as Tenzin, used his abilities to imitate Gennosuke's voice and deceive Kashiro. After this, Kouga's group meets again, and after noticing that the hawk had headed towards the inn where the Iga were, they assumed that they had already been informed, so they decide to hide and wait for them. Moments later, we see that Oboro and the real Gennosuke had decided to follow the falcon, which takes them to Kashiro's body. Once he finds him, Gennosuke bursts into tears, mourning the death of his companion. Meanwhile, the Kouga ninjas watch them, hidden in the undergrowth. That's when Kajero mentions that with Zeman's current appearance he could easily approach and kill them. Next, Gennosuke continues to mourn the death of his friend, although he notices that his body does not have any wounds. After this, he notices Hayoma's body prostrate in front of them, and assumes that he must have been the one who murdered Kashiro. Immediately afterwards, he proceeds to approach him to see him carefully. That is when he notices that his face is disfigured by the attack he received, which makes it difficult for him to recognize him, but confirms his identity by identifying his hair. As it approached, Kouga's ninjas decided to take advantage of their comrade's body and use it as a decoy, which, after a few seconds, is stabbed multiple times by Gennosuke, while Oboro begs him to stop, asking him not to dishonor the dead, and adding that she was horrified when Tenzin humiliated Jayabu's body by leaving it lying at the entrance to the bridge. Next, he mentions that although Hayoma was his enemy, he was skilled enough to take Kishiro with him to death, and he exclaims that by despising that he is also despising Kishiro himself. Furthermore, he adds that his opponent has even remained standing after death. After saying this, Oboro asks if Tenzin also died, but Aikinu replies that that is not possible. Hearing this raises suspicions and doubts among the Kouga ninjas, who claim that what they say does not make sense. That's when, about to begin his attack, Zeman notices that there is a large group of people walking near them, which seems strange considering the time. At that moment, it is revealed to us that Ofuku, the guardian of one of the shogun's heirs, has secretly left the palace, and he heads to Hanzo's residence, apparently with the intention of intervening in some way in the war. Hanzo is informed of this, but gives the order to let her access his lands. Returning to Aikinu, just when the girl had finished burying Kishiro, she sees the group of escorts carrying Ofuku arrive. Those who, upon noticing his presence, ask him to identify himself. However, once they notice Hyoma's corpse, they raise their guard, stating that they are suspicious. Immediately, Aikinu announces that they are heading to Sunpu on orders from the retired shogun and proceeds to ask who they are. Upon hearing this, the guards instantly doubt the girl's words, but she tries to convince them by telling them that they belong to the Iga clan. But upon hearing this, Ofuku decides to get out of the carriage and talk to them directly, after asking his guards to put away their weapons. Next, she asks Aikinu if they are the ones covered by the peace treaty that Hanzo has revoked. He then proceeds to introduce himself and ask the girls specifically if their names are Oboro and Aikinu, adding that he knows them because those were the names that Ojin wrote on the scroll of the 10 best ninjas of Iga, and that they were chosen for the cause. After mentioning this and approaching, he asks for the identity of the man lying dead on the ground. Aikinu answers that it is Hyoma, a Kouga ninja, news that seems to make Ofuku very happy, who congratulates them and proceeds to ask them where their other classmates are. His happy face collapsed when he heard that the rest of his companions died, stating that only a few days have passed since the treaty was revoked. At that moment, it is revealed to us that Tenzin is still alive and is somehow in the process of reanimation. Returning to the Iga, the girls ask the heir's guardian what that cause was that she was talking about earlier, to which she responds that she is surprised that they have been fighting without even knowing the reason for their fight. So he proceeds to tell them the importance of the outcome of the war they are in. At the same time, we see Hanzo mention that he decided not to intervene in Ofuku's actions to avoid any conflict arising, stating that she is the type of woman who reveals herself the more they try to hold her back. However, he comments that despite his power and influence, it doesn't really matter what kind of dirty trick he plans to use in the war, since being an external agent there is not much you can do. Moments later, after telling the girls what they are fighting for, Ofuku proceeds to invite them to go to Sunpu with her, stating that for the sake of his heir, he cannot allow them to die. After remembering the words that Gennosuke Kouga expressed in his letter to the Iga, Oboro decides to accept the offer, to which Aikinu mentions that they can't leave Kouga's remaining ninja alive, to which the tutor responds that that is correct, but that they must also keep them alive. They then proceed to leave. After this, Gennosuke Kouga and the others come out of hiding after having learned the truth behind the conflict. At the same time, we see Tenzin complete his reanimation process and come back to life again. At that moment, during a flashback, we discover that in the past Ojin had the opportunity to take down Danjo, but she was unable to achieve this due to the feelings she had towards him. Therefore, Tenzin considers his death a disgrace and plans to prevent it from happening again, making Oboro send Gennosuke to the grave once and for all. Next, we see Gennosuke Kouga and his companions chatting in an inn, where they mention that even though Gennosuke feels less motivated to fight after learning the truth, he believes that too much blood has been shed and that it will not end unless one of the parties is annihilated. Moments later, we see Kajero and Zeman talking outside while Gennosuke Kouga rests, considering that now that the Iga have the protection of the tutor and her escorts, things will not be the same, adding that now more than ever they must strive to protect Gennosuke, even if it costs them their lives. Next, we see Oboro and company advance on their journey, when at one point, the Iga leader asks to be allowed to walk, but immediately the girl is ordered to return to her carriage, because they do not know when they might be attacked by the Kouga. Therefore, they resume their path, later arriving at an inn, which is kept under guard by guards at all times. Eventually, Tenzin appears at the scene, but is quickly rejected by the guards, those who call him an intruder as soon as they notice that he causes harm to one of the escorts, causing everyone to rush at him and call for reinforcements. They arrive instantly along with Aikinu, who, noticing the presence of his companion, asks them to stop, announcing them that it is a member of their team. They then proceed to enter and Aikinu explains the situation to Tenzin, who quickly interrupts her to explain that they have to take care of something more important first. That's when he mentions that he knows Kajero's location, suggesting that they should take the opportunity to kill her, since this one seems to be waiting for someone. Upon hearing this, the bodyguards offer to support them, but Tenzin refuses, adding that they are not people they can defeat. He then whispers to Aikinu that Kajero was the one who actually killed Kashiro, explaining that that is the reason why the boy did not have any injuries, since Kajero is capable of poisoning men with his size, but she adds that her techniques cannot be used on women, so Tenzin tells her that only she could defeat her. Hearing this, Aikinu asks him to wait there while she quickly goes to a room to get something. Upon arriving, we see her take an item out of a box and put it in her suit, along with the flute that Gennosuke left in the Iga village earlier. Just then Tenzin enters and asks what that is, to which the girl responds by kneeling and asking for forgiveness, stating that she only kept it because Oboro likes it. And even though they have to get revenge on them, it could be a good memory. After hearing this, Tenzin decides to turn a blind eye, telling her that he will pretend not to have seen anything. Afterwards, they set off in search of Kajero, and as they approach, they talk about Ofuku's intentions, who seems to have told them that she can take care of destroying the Kouga. This causes Tenzin to say that the war between the clans has nothing to do with their war for succession, stating that if they accept their help in a certain way they would dishonor their dead, something that Aikinu strongly agrees with, exclaiming that they must spill every last drop of Kouga blood, and adding that they will not be able to stop fighting until this happens. But at the same time, she mentions that due to Oboro's blindness, she intended to take her alive to Sunpu. That's when we confirm that the one who is with Aikinu is actually Zeman, since he is surprised to hear about the blindness. Besides the fact that at that moment the real Tenzin appears at the inn in front of the guards. Then they both arrive at the bridge where Kajero is located, and Aikinu prepares to carry out his confrontation, but has some doubts regarding Oboro's feelings for Gennosuke Kouga, because he is aware that ending the Kouga represents the end of the relationship between Oboro and Gennosuke Kouga. After hearing this, Zeman manages to convince her to continue with the plan, expressing that despite everything there is no other way to make the feeling of revenge disappear. In this way, Aikinu proceeds with what was planned and appears in front of Kajero along with Zeman. He then takes out Kashiro's weapon and pounces on Kouga's girl, attacking ferociously while thinking of all his fallen comrades, managing to knock his opponent down, to later use his special ability against her, with which he hides in the mist and prepares to deliver a lethal blow. But when she is about to hit it, she is stopped by Zeman, who holds firmly as Kajero approaches with a dagger. That's when the poor girl realizes that she has been tricked, as she is then impaled by the blade wielded by her rival, who tells him that with his blood he will mark the path to hell so that Oboro will travel it soon. After this, when the girl is about to die, she stares at Zeman, managing to touch a sensitive chord in him, who, after finishing the fight, thinks about how peace could be achieved between both clans if only one of the Iga decided to do so, but at the same time, being aware that it is too late, which in a way saddens him. After this, Kajero congratulates him for the good work, mentioning that now only Oboro is missing, and asking Zeman to let him be the one to kill her, so he takes advantage of the moment to reveal to the girl that Oboro still has his eyes sealed. On the other hand, we see that Ofuku's guards are in charge of giving Oboro Gennosuke's flute, and later we see how a platoon of these escorts arrives at the bridge where Aikinu was eliminated, and where they run into Zeman still disguised as Tenzin, who had just separated from his partner. He automatically continues his performance, proceeding to apologize to the guards for his previous behavior. Hearing this, the group, suspicious of his words, ask where Aikinu is, but he responds by stating that he is chasing Gennosuke, and he adds that there is a strong possibility that he has died. Upon hearing this, one of the guards mentions that he understands that the Kouga had one more girl, referring to Kajero, to which Zeman responds by confirming and revealing that he captured her alive, turned her into a woman, and convinced her to join Iga. After this, the guard confesses that he considers him a trusted ally, and he proceeds to mention that Aikinu revealed to him that he could not die from a wound and that he is an immortal ninja, what leaves Zeman cold. The guard then reveals that Tenzin can only die if he is decapitated or cremated, and he expresses that he would like to test for himself if he is really capable of returning to life. That's when, suddenly, the escort releases a blade that he had hidden in his arm, instantly piercing Zeman's body. Moments later, we discover that the mysterious escort is actually Tenzin in disguise, and that the weapon they really used is a spear that one of the guards was holding behind him. Discovering this leaves Zeman totally shocked, and after a few seconds, after running out of options, he decides to pounce on Tenzin despite still being pierced by the spear, all to try to bring a sword blow closer that never comes, because he is abruptly attacked by all the escorts at the same time, who pierce and immobilize him. At that moment, Tenzin confesses to the dying boy that in the past, the Iga had a ninja with abilities like his, and thanks to him they managed to deceive the Kouga during old confrontations. While hearing these words, poor Zeman inevitably dies. After this, Tenzin admits that the boy managed to imitate him well, but unfortunately his luck ran out. Next, we return to Gennosuke Kouga, who meets Kajero again. Upon arrival, the girl crosses a name off the list and falsely informs Gennosuke Kouga that she managed to eliminate Oboro. He congratulates her on her good work and asks her if she is okay, to which she responds affirmatively, adding that Zeman managed to infiltrate Ofuku's caravan, After this, a saddened Kajero asks Gennosuke if they could be together the day the successor is chosen, adding that she just wants to be close to him, even if they aren't able to physically touch each other. He also comments that with the arrival of the new president and the elimination of the Iga, the ninjas may no longer be necessary. So he adds that he could dedicate himself to living for him and for him. Hearing this, Gennosuke Kouga remains silent, so Kajero gets up and thinks that he must take care of Oboro. Immediately afterwards, we see the girl running quickly outside determined to achieve her goal. On the other hand, we can see Tenzin having tea and chatting with Ofuku and his guards, when she comments that it seems strange that he has revealed his technique, because he is a ninja and must keep them a secret. To which Tenzin responds by stating that he let his guard down and that he does not have much experience as an Iga ninja, revealing that he was wandering until one day he arrived at his village, 180 years ago. In addition to that, he adds that the Kouga rejected them and therefore treated them as they deserved. After laughing at some of his comments, Ofuku asks him about the way he heals his wounds, because one of his subordinates noticed something strange about it. Let us remember that when he heals, a small face appears and moves over his body, devouring his blood and closing his wounds. Upon hearing this, Tenzin responds by mentioning that his men had surely never seen anyone die, suggesting that in the confusion they could have imagined it. After this, he gets up and leaves just after announcing that they will soon receive a visit from a woman from Kouga, ordering Ofuku and his guards to let her pass without resistance, which she accepts, although she mentions that the matter gives her a bad feeling. Eventually, they receive Kajero, and Tenzin proceeds to approach her to talk to her, pretending to be Zeman in disguise. That's when he tells the girl that they are being watched and that Ofuku doesn't trust her because she is a member of Kouga. So he mentions that in order for them to trust them, they must pretend that they are lovers. He pounces on her, stating that the girl must give him her virginity for it to be credible. This obviously scares Kajero, who fears for his partner's safety. After noticing Tenzin's insistence, the girl realizes that this really isn't Zeman, and he wonders how it is possible that this one is still alive. At that moment, he realizes that his partner has probably died, so he decides to play along with Tenzin to avenge him. After a few moments, Kajero does his best to fulfill his duty, trying to visualize Gennosuke Kouga while he performs his actions, going so far as to kiss Tenzin, who is completely unaware of what is coming to him. Eventually, during the act, he falls dead, and Kajero takes the opportunity to deliver the final blow. Immediately, the guards, who are witnessing everything, go into attack, managing to capture the girl, who cannot do much against so many enemies. Later, Ofuku and Oboro come to see what is happening, and the tutor proceeds to order the blind Iga leader to eliminate the prisoner. Hearing this, Kajero asks how Oboro could allow others to intervene in his war, stating that it is an insult to ninjas. Next, he reproaches him for having sealed his eyes, and he confesses that he lied to Gennosuke Kouga, telling him that she had already been murdered, trying to play with his feelings. But when he tried to reveal what Gennosuke Kouga had responded to the news of his death, Oboro answers for herself what Gennosuke had said. This infuriates Kajero, who begins to scream and try to free himself, which makes Ofuku insist that she be killed. But Oboro mentions that it's a better idea to keep her alive so he can attract Gennosuke, stating that they will finish him off before reaching Sunpu and recover the scroll. Furthermore, he adds that this is the only way they can win the war. Later, we can see Gennosuke Kouga on a boat, continuing his journey. It is there that he meets the son of the traveling piper who was murdered, who asks Gennosuke Kouga if he is capable of playing the flute. Hearing this, Gennosuke introduces himself and decides to play a little, which makes the boy very happy. At the same time, we see Ofuku's caravan advancing on its way overland, and we notice how Oboro cries, thinking that he wants to see Gennosuke Kouga at least one more time. Eventually, Ofuku and company arrive at an inn where they settle in for the night. At one point, we discover that Kajero managed to eliminate 2 of the guards, managing to escape from his confinement. Next, we can see how the girl wanders through the corridors of the room with a gun in her hands, in search of Oboro. On the other hand, we discovered that Tenzin's body had been transported along with them and he revived again. After this, we see that Kajero manages to find his target and prepares to kill the leader of the Iga. But when she is about to land her blow, she is interrupted by Tenzin. Returning to Gennosuke Kouga, we discover that during his journey, his enemies left him a sign with a message explaining the situation, stating that Kajero has been captured and will be held captive for an entire day, and demanding Gennosuke Kouga to appear along with the scroll if he wants his companion to survive. Back with the Iga, we discover that Tenzin managed to capture his prisoner again, but this time he keeps an eye on her personally. During that night, everyone in the room can hear the screams of pain from Kajero, who is being tortured by him, which makes the girl suffer, throwing multiple needles at her to write the word Iga on her bare skin. While he admits that the girl managed to surprise him at the last moment, since he did not expect her size to poison him. Moments later, we can see how Oboro leaves his room and quickly goes to where his partner is, which is confessing to Kajero that he does not share his leader's ideals and that if it were not for her, he would try to abuse her again, stating that he wouldn't mind dying again. The girl, tired from the abuse, asks him to kill her, but he refuses, stating that it really doesn't matter how long it takes, since the next day your wish will come true. After saying this, Tenzin continues to torture her while Oboro runs over to where they are, begging him to stop. Once she reaches the site, her partner is surprised that she got there alone, stating that she is finally acting like a ninja. After that, he comments that his idea of attracting Gennosuke through Kajero was brilliant and that Ofuku was pleasantly surprised by it. Finally, he adds that she did what would be expected of the leader of a ninja clan, stating that apart from being beautiful she can also be very cruel. Hearing this, Oboro asks if killing her right now would be the kindest thing to do, and he proceeds to reproach Tenzin that even though he is taking revenge, his rival is a person and should show a little compassion. After hearing this, Tenzin mentions that he has heard many ninjas say that, but states that he does not know the meaning of those words. He then proceeds to shoot more needles towards his prisoner. At that moment, his screams of pain can be heard by Gennosuke Kouga, who was walking nearby. Moments later, we can see Tenzin grab Oboro tightly and throw her to the ground. He then proceeds to explain to her the way Kajero's abilities work, then confesses that he will abuse her again, adding that he wants me to look at them while he does it. Obviously, Oboro instantly refuses, saying that on top of that his eyes are still sealed. To which Tenzin replies that it has been more than 7 days since they left the village. He then adds that the higher-ups are in favor of Iga and that the next day they will arrive in Sunpu. After mentioning this, he tries to abuse Oboro as well. That's when Gennosuke comes into play, appearing behind them and asking Tenzin why he's still alive. To which he responds by exclaiming that Gennosuke Kouga is not worthy of knowing, while preparing to battle, adding that he did it to have the opportunity to kill him. At that moment, he congratulates Oboro for having planned the trap to lure Gennosuke, mentioning that he looked really happy when he helped them plot against him and ordering him to let him handle the rest. Tenzin then pounces on Gennosuke Kouga, trying to land a sword blow, but he retreats and despite his blindness he manages to defend himself quite well. They move their battle outside the facility, where Tenzin tells Gennosuke Kouga that without his powers he does not even reach the level of a samurai. The two continue to exchange attacks constantly, until Gennosuke suffers a deep cut on his arm. However, they quickly resume the exchanges, but this time it is Tenzin who suffers a cut on his hand, which he manages to heal quickly with his special ability. At this moment, facing Gennosuke exhausted and crouched on the ground, Tenzin tells him to give up and beg for his life, suggesting that maybe he could let him live until he reaches Sunpu. Next, he mentions that if there really is a hell, being born in that era, not dying in 214 years, and yet never having gotten what you've wanted most is truly hell. After this, try to attack Gennosuke Kouga again, which does the best it can to defend itself from their ferocious attacks. After another while of combat, both suffer constant cuts until Gennosuke Kouga falls to the ground. Seconds later, he stands up and asks his rival what he is hiding in his body, to which he responds by saying that it is his hatred against the Kouga which has become an obsession to the point that he no longer feels pain. That's when Gennosuke Kouga asks him if he was the one who set the trap for the Kouga at the end of the war of the previous era, to which he responds by confessing that at that time the Iga were on the brink of annihilation, and that it was a unique opportunity, stating that without the Oda army's attack, the clans would have been forced to remain peaceful based on the relationship between Danjo and Ojin, definitively revealing that Tenzin was the culprit that kept the two families mired in hatred for so many years. He later comments that the person Gennosuke Kouga should really hate is the Shogun's family, revealing that they are using the ninjas as a method to choose the successor. After a few words, Tenzin attacks Gennosuke again, who manages to stop some attacks, but he eventually ends up being impaled by his opponent's weapon, which pierces him right in the shoulder, making him scream in pain and immobilizing him for a moment. After this, after hearing Oboro's screams of despair, Gennosuke tightly holds the weapon that is stuck in him, and with a single movement, he swings his sword at his rival, instantly cutting off his head. Tenzin is completely shocked as his head detaches from his body, and then falls to the ground. At the same time, we see that Ofuku finds out that Oboro left his compound, and after finding his men scared, he orders them to find her immediately. After this, Gennosuke Kouga turns to Oboro and asks her if she has a sword, but she answers in the negative, to which Gennosuke orders him to take one as they must fight, stating that he has to be able to do so. After saying this, he reveals to the girl that his eyes are sealed, to which she responds by informing that hers are too. Hearing this surprises Gennosuke, who asks if it was the work of the other Iga members, to which the girl confesses that she did not, adding that she did it herself because she did not want to witness the battle against the Kouga. After this comment, Oboro implores Gennosuke Kouga to kill her before her eyes open. Just then, out of nowhere, Kajero crawls out of the compound where she was held captive, and she asks Gennosuke why he doesn't finish her off, questioning if he plans to betray his entire clan and herself, reminding him that it was she who set the trap to lure him and kill him. While listening to her words, Gennosuke Kouga approaches Kajero and picks her up to leave with her. But as they leave, Kajero tries to kiss Gennosuke Kouga, but they both fall to the ground. That's when she takes the opportunity to give the scroll to Oboro, telling him to leave and live her life alone. After this, he approaches Gennosuke Kouga, who is still lying on the ground, weak from the fight and his injuries, to try to kiss him again, with the aim of putting an end to everything and dying with him. But as he tries, Oboro desperately asks him to stop. Just then, the seal on her eyes is undone and she uses her eye technique to neutralize Kagero's ability. Later we discovered that she did manage to poison Gennosuke Kouga with the previous kiss, and that is why he did not get up. After seeing Kouga's girl collapse, Oboro runs to check on Gennosuke, but he just manages to hear Ofuku's guards approaching, so he decides to drag Gennosuke Kouga and hide inside the enclosure with him. Later, we see how the dying Gennosuke confesses through tears to the girl that he never wanted to kill anyone. Hearing this, Oboro cries and lies down next to him. On the other hand, we can see how Tenzin's headless corpse prepares to revive again. Eventually, Ofuku and his guards arrive at the site and see his headless body. But even though her escorts are quite shocked, Ofuku remains calm and reminds them that Tenzin is an immortal ninja. He then orders his men to put the head back on, but even though they are really terrified, they obey her. Next we see how Oboro witnesses live and direct how Tenzin begins his reanimation process, watching him squirm as his head attaches back to his body. The girl remembers the words of her grandmother Ojin, who in the past warned her to be careful with Tenzin, stating that even though they knew his immortality technique, they didn't know where it came from, adding that it is not a ninja technique, but something that lives in his body, and that does not let him die. Already in the present, taking into account Ojin's words and witnessing the return of such a despicable being, Oboro uses his eye technique to interrupt his resuscitation process, making Tenzin die once and for all in front of Ofuku and his guards. Later, something unimaginable happens. The creature that inhabited Tenzin's body takes control of his remains, and proceeds to use the junction between his head and his body as a mouth. Then he announces to everyone that Gennosuke is hiding behind Oboro under the stairs. After witnessing this, Oboro uses his technique against the creature again, this time with more force than ever, thus managing, after remembering Gennosuke's words, to tear the head off the body of his target without even touching it, thus eliminating the being that lived inside Tenzin. Next we see how Ofuku and company confront Oboro, who admits that what the creature said is true, confirming that behind it is a wounded and poisoned Gennosuke. But he adds that even if they kill him, the reputation of the Iga clan will not improve. Hearing this surprises the tutor, who comments that those words are inappropriate for a ninja, but that she understands. Next, send a messenger to Hanzo, adding that both factions will face him and his referees in an equal fight, which Oboro accepts. Then, the next day, we see that Gennosuke Kouga was transported with the others to Hanzo's mansion. It is there where we can see how Kairo, Hanzo's nephew and Oboro's old acquaintance, approaches her to talk. There he lets the girl know that he regrets the whole situation, stating that he wishes it had never happened. Later, he gives her a sword, noticing that the girl was not carrying any weapon, which Oboro accepts and thanks him. A while later, we can see how everyone prepares to witness the combat. There we discover that Gennosuke is still very injured to the point that he can barely stand. However, Ofuku mentions that it is enough for him to be able to get up for the battle to take place, so he orders them to search for him. Moments later, after picking up both adversaries, they are taken in carriages to the place where the fight will take place. Upon arriving, Oboro can't help but think about the words his beloved Gennosuke said to him before this whole terrible situation occurred, in which he reflected his hope to achieve peace between his clans. The girl continues her way to the battlefield escorted by the guards during the sunset, time during which she is approached by memories of her good times with Gennosuke Kouga. At the same time, he also remembers the happy moments with his fallen companions from Iga, in addition to fantasizing about the moment of the marriage ceremony that she could have celebrated with her beloved, if it weren't for the tragic future that fate had in store for them. After advancing towards the place of combat, he appears before everyone present and in front of his opponent. After a few moments, Ofuku expresses to everyone that during his trip, she and her subordinates became involved in the war purely by chance, but he affirms that until that moment, they have not intervened in any way in the battles to favor anyone, noting that in the same way, he is aware that they have been observed by one of the members of the Hattori family all this time, so he himself can corroborate that his words are true. Immediately afterwards, Ofuku tells him that he would appreciate it if he could act as a witness before the great shogun again. He accepts. The tutor then reveals to the viewers that Gennosuke's eyes were sealed by the Iga members, and he adds that he has suffered serious injuries, but comments that, however, that is what ninja battles are about, so they would not take any kind of consideration for him in battle. Upon hearing this, Hanzo exclaims that he hates the crude way in which the tutor expresses herself, stating that acting in this way will only attract suspicion towards him. Hearing these words leaves the woman shocked. At that time, we find out that during the conversation Oboro had with Kairo that morning, he offered to help her in some way. However, the girl claimed she didn't need anything. But when he was about to leave, Oboro confessed that there was something he could do for her. So he proceeded to ask him to keep his beloved Gennosuke's flute, which he gladly accepted, promising that he would take care of her. Oboro then tried to tell him what he should do in case she died, but this is interrupted by the boy, who tells him that that will not happen, stating that Gennosuke is very injured, and in that state, she should consider finishing him off once and for all for her clan. Returning to the present, we can see that Gennosuke Kouga can barely stand and must be assisted by a guard. Everyone looks expectantly at the fighters, while Gennosuke Kouga only tries to visualize his beloved Oboro, fantasizing about them putting aside the battle and coming together again. But these are abruptly interrupted by Afuku, who yells at the girl to kill Gennosuke Kouga once and for all. But after hearing this, both fighters remain motionless for several seconds, until at a certain moment, Oboro raises his sword and points it towards Gennosuke Kouga, and while everyone watches, expectant, after a few tense seconds, the Iga leader confesses to her opponent that she loves him. Immediately afterwards, she turns the tip of the weapon towards herself and stabs it into her chest, before falling to the ground. Just at that moment, the seal on Gennosuke Kouga's eyes is undone, and he is able to witness how his beloved Oboro lies lifeless on the ground. After witnessing this, Afuku instantly goes crazy, as the girl's death represents that his side has lost, and the heir of the great shogun will not be the child he has cared for. During his moment of desperation, he angrily orders his guards to assassinate Gennosuke. And although his men hesitate about what to do, after a few moments, they rush towards Gennosuke Kouga to eliminate him. But of course they don't succeed, since Gennosuke Kouga, in his serene but probably emotionally destroyed state, he is able to use his technique to make his enemies violently eliminate themselves without even seeing them directly. This demonstration of power leaves all the spectators frozen, especially Afuku, whom Gennosuke Kouga observes with total contempt. After this, Gennosuke slowly approaches the scroll and picks it up, to later approach Oboro, take her in his arms and with his own blood, cross out her name from the parchment, officially giving victory to the Kouga clan. Meanwhile, Hanzo and his nephew Kaiohakairo observe the situation, surprised to learn that the Iga clan turned out to be the losing faction. At the same time, we can see that Afuku completely lost his sanity after the outcome of the battle, constantly repeating that his end has come. A fact that makes Hanzo look at her with contempt and question how she is still alive after her actions. Next, we see that Gennosuke Kouga throws the scroll into the air, which is picked up by a falcon who will take the message to Sunpu. Suddenly, as the bird leaves, Gennosuke announces that the Iga won, and it is revealed to us that the parchment has all the names crossed out, including his. Next, we see how he approaches the lake where they fought, entering the water with his sword in hand, remembering the words of his beloved Oboro as he carries her lifeless body next to him. Words that express that during all the good times he spent with Gennosuke, she thought that, in the past, both had shared the same soul, which divided, giving rise to two different ones, adding that they are dying to regain their original form. At that moment, after remembering his words, Gennosuke Kouga thinks that if that is true, then he is sure that they will meet again, no matter how many generations it takes them to do it, or the time in which it happens. Next, after a moment of extreme sadness, Gennosuke uses his weapon to pierce himself, falling into the water with his beloved and dying at his side. And so the anime ends.